fire alarm this evening. So if there is a fire, or the alarm goes off, we all get up and walk that way, out of the front door and turn right, and we congregate in the park by Druids Creek. There will be members of staff there and able to direct us. Oh God, have we done the fire alarm? St John's Churchyard, I've got the name of it. Public toilets are across the foyer. Please switch your mobile phone to silent while in the meeting. Members of the public are more than welcome to photograph, audio record, tweet public proceedings of the meeting. I'd ask you to do it in such a way as not to disturb other people. The code for accessing the council's Wi-Fi is BBC2. That's BBC in lowercase, 2 as a number. Is the full stop part of the code, or is it just the punctuation at the end of the sentence? Brilliant, so it's BBC2. If you don't want to be filmed, and the likelihood of that being filmed is fairly remote, please tell James, who's got the camera up there, and he will make sure that you're not included in any of the images. Apologies, have we any apologies, Councillor Darren Merrill, and we have someone subbing? Brilliant. To the voting members, please confirm. Any items that I feel are urgent, we have an addendum, which everyone has had a chance to read. Basically, we can go slowly through the next bit, and if people haven't caught up with reading it, by the time we get to the development control item, we can have a short, give it a couple of minutes there. Planning policy. There's also a member pack in front of you with all the pictures. Planning policy, you've asked for the following announcements made. The council has published the further preferred option of the Old Kent Road Area Action Plan for consultation between the 13th of December 2017 and 21st of March 2018. The Old Kent Road Area Action Plan, APP, is a plan to regenerate the Old Kent Road and the surrounding area, including the extension of the Bakerloo line. It sets out a vision for how the area will change over the next 20 years. To find out more about the plan and the consultation, please visit our website or contact the Council's Planning Policy team. Announcement made. Disclosure of interest and dispensation. Any member got an interest or a dispensation they wish to disclose? No? Can we agree the minutes held on the 7th of November? Are those agreed? Agreed, let's hear it. Agreed. Brilliant. We then move on to the first item. As I said to everyone outside, we've got boys in blue always get that one. We now move into item 6. Which one's been withdrawn? 9. We now move to item 6, which is releasing the money for the Lower Road highway improvements. Jack, have you anything to say? Go on.
Thank you, Chair. This is a release report for £726,000, £810.37 from 3 legal agreements. The aim of the Lower Road project is to develop a highway scheme which achieves policy 32 of the Canada Water Area Action Plan. The aims of which are to enhance the street environment of the area, improve pedestrian cycle provision, and improve traffic efficiency in the area. There's been full consultation on the AAP, started in 2013, and there will be further consultation undertaken on the detailed design of the individual elements. Thank you.
Is that agreed? Sorry, are there any questions of Jack? I mean, you assume that you might want to ask questions. If there are no questions of Jack, is that agreed? That's seconded and agreed. Brilliant. We then go on to number 7, which is Harper Road Improvement Scheme. Jack, do it the same.
Thanks, Chair. This is a release for £267,259.52 from 9 legal agreements. The details of the project are given in paragraphs 5 to 11 of the report, but in summary, the funds will go towards making the area safer and more attractive and provide improved crossing points for vulnerable users. Ward councillors and friends of the Harper Road resident group are all aware and supporters of the project. Consultation on detailed designs will take place at the time. Thank you.
Any questions, Jack? If there are no questions of Jack, I propose, is there a seconder? Seconded. Is that agreed? Agreed. Thank you very much. Number 8, Balfour Street, to release money. Tell us how much it is, Jack.
It's £252,301.86 from 6 legal agreements. This project has the aim of improving the safety of pedestrians and cyclists through highway and public realm upgrades. Specific details are given in paragraph 4 of the report that include footway upgrades and tree planting, speed reduction and a relocated pedestrian crossing to improve the link between parks. Residents, businesses and community groups were consulted in 2016-17 and their comments have been included in the designs. Thank you.
Any questions of Jack? If there are no questions of Jack, I propose it. If that's, is it seconded? Brilliant. Is that agreed? Agreed. Brilliant. And number 9 has been withdrawn, I understand, to further work. Considerably further work. And number 10, school expansion programme. Tell us how much we're releasing for that, Jack.
This is £11,966,549.59 from 121 separate agreements. Through a number of reports, 15 schools in the borough have been identified as requiring expansion. This release of Section 106 funds will support the wider funding programme for these works. Further details regarding the individual schools and the proposed works are given in the body of the report. The expansion programme has been widely consulted upon, including statutory consultation associated with each planning permission, and community councils, local ward members and the schools themselves have all been consulted over the lifetime of the school places strategy. Thank you.
Any questions of Jack? If there are no questions of Jack, I propose, is that seconded? Brilliant. Is that agreed? Yes, Chair. Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed, Jack. Can I also say, it is always welcome in many respects to see the other end of the process of the discussions that we have at planning committees, which is when we allocate the money that we draw down from developments and put them into schemes which are of community benefit, particularly schools and road improvements. And on my rough calculation, that was something in the order of £14 million, the money of which was gathered over how many schemes? The promise of an early bath. But that was a number of schemes over a few years, and I just think it is the more positive side of some of the work that we do. We now move into, equally positive, the development management item, which everyone is probably here for, which is the shopping centre. Don't tell Jack that. Is the shopping centre, Elephant and Castle, and the Metropolitan Tabernacle, Elephant and Castle, and that's the listed building bit, which links with the two, and we're taking them as one. Right. I'm just going to find my bit on the, make sure that's been withdrawn. Development management. Officers, who are these people over here and over there, will present the reports. These people over here, the members, will listen to the officers, and then these people here will listen to any objectors, the applicant or their applicant's agent, anyone that might be speaking in support of the application, and then the ward councillors representing the area affected by the proposal. Going from the ward councillor bits, I recognise that this particular site spans spans a ward boundary, so that the councillors who wish to speak on behalf of the east of the site and councillors who wish to speak on the west of the site will be asked specific questions after the 3 minutes to actually be able to represent the interests of their constituents quite separately, over and above any general comments they might wish to make, and that is a joint presentation. Similarly, with the objectors, I understand there are a number of people who are coming forward to raise the objections, and if you use that 3 minutes to introduce yourselves, direct us towards any questions you would very much like us to ask, but I am going to be asking questions, or members of the committee are going to be asking questions of each of the people who are up the front representing the objectors, questions about the viability and affordable housing. Each presentation will be asked a question about retail. Each presentation will ask if they wish to add regarding the groups which are protected characteristics, and each presentation will be asked to direct. I've done that question, lines of questioning. I realise that's not a complete list, but I hope we are going to capture each of the specific points the objectors would like to raise, and Patrick in particular, the issues around your operation, bingo, the bowling, and the protected status of some of the people that use your facilities. If there is there will be an opportunity to answer a catch-all question. Is there anything else you would like to add at the end of it, just in case someone's forgotten? Exactly the same rules will apply to the applicant. They will do their 3 minutes, and then they will be asked exactly the same series of questions to ensure that there is fairness in the approach. Is everyone clear about that? Brilliant. The officers. Yes.
Before you go over to the officers, could I just check that there have been enough addendum reports for people in the audience, because it may or may not affect what people say, but there has been actually some changes to the affordable housing offer, which people may wish to know. May not make any difference to what they think, but just they should be aware.
50 of them were printed and were available to people. Has everyone who thinks they ought to have one got one? Could someone who has got one and doesn't need it share? Brilliant. Yeah.
Sorry, can I just clarify? You just said that we were considering both applications together. Will there be separate votes
Yeah.
for the two, but we're discussing them as one? Is that correct?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I usually wait for John to advise me on the licences and having picked up the last bit.
Just want to be clear, that's all the same.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, well done. Okay, who's going to give it their best shot? Radine.
Thank you, Chair. The Council for quite some time has had aspirations for the redevelopment of the shopping centre at Elephant and Castle. This objective has been formally set out in various policy and guidance documents over many years, including most recently the core strategy and the Elephant and Castle SPD. This application comes forward in the context of an area that has already experienced very significant change, with new housing and a new leisure centre already in place, with more to come. The redevelopment of the shopping centre, together with the site of the LCC, is in some ways the final piece of the jigsaw, and as such is clearly to be welcomed. The proposal, in its broadest sense, is a positive response to the requirements set out in policy and will provide almost 1,000 new homes, new retail floor space, new business space, leisure uses including a new music venue, a new building for the LCC together with the UAL, and also facilitate a new ticket hall for the Northern Line underground station. The development will bring with it new employment both during construction and within the completed development. The development occupies 2 sites, which we refer to as East and West, either side of the northern end of Newington Butts at Elephant. In brief, the east site provides 4 principal buildings comprised of the new LCC accommodation above the Northern Line ticket hall to the north, fronting New Kent Road, all within a 12-storey building. To the west and south are 2 other blocks comprising retail and leisure uses, each with paired residential towers above at 27 and 32 stories high, and then at 21 and 23 stories high. The final building is 4 stories high and would be centrally located beside the railway viaduct, forming the edge of a central square. New routes are provided through the site, linking transport nodes and adjoining streets. The west site comprises a mansion block typology along the majority of Oswin Street, a residential tower of 20 stories fronting St George's Road, and a further block turning the corner from St George's Road into Newington Butts and immediately adjacent the Tabernacle building. This block will comprise the new music venue on the front, with retail floor space at the lower levels fronting onto Pastor Street behind. Above will be 2 further residential towers at 24 and 35 stories high. As set out in the main report, the development in terms of land use will deliver a number of key development plan objectives for the area through the provision of new and increased retail floor space, leisure and cultural facilities, new housing, a new home for a significant educational occupier, which is the LCC, together with facilitating a major piece of transport infrastructure in the form of the new ticket hall. This new ticket hall, together with the new escalators giving access and egress to and from the platforms, is of major significance and will create a highly integrated and efficient public transport hub, which is key to the success of the regeneration of the opportunity area. Whilst there would be a net loss in leisure floor space, the overall D-class use floor space would increase. The report concludes that the level of leisure use within the development is acceptable and complies with policy. However, it is acknowledged that the loss of the specific leisure use, which is the bingo, has equalities implications. Consequently, mitigation is proposed by way of obligating the leisure operator to hold events which could include or be specifically provided for elderly people and people from black and ethnic minority backgrounds, to explore the feasibility of providing additional leisure space within the proposed basement on the east site. These measures will be addressed in the Section 106 agreement as set out in paras 212 and 213 of the main report. The 2010 Equality Act places the local planning authority under a legal duty to have due regard to the advancement of equality in the exercise of its powers, including planning powers. The report covers in some detail the equalities implications of this proposal so that they are fully taken into account in the assessment of the application and to aid members in undertaking this duty. As set out in the equality section of the report, beginning at page 79, the main groups with protected characteristics who have been identified as being potentially negatively impacted are those defined by means of age and race. In essence, this relates to users of the bingo hall who tend to be from black and minority ethnic groups, as well as those in older age groups. Amongst the traders in the centre, and also taking account of their employees and customers, these same groups are also identified as being potentially adversely impacted. A draft local business support and relocation strategy was submitted with the application, setting out measures to help address negative equality impacts, and already Tree Shepherd, an independent business advisor, has been appointed to assist traders in the centre. A relocation fund of $634,000 will be secured by legal agreement, and a strategy for the allocation of funds to assist traders will be agreed between the council, the traders themselves and Tree Shepherd. Other measures include the preparation of a database of relocation opportunities within the area and the identification of affordable retail units being delivered in the area. These measures are set out in extensive detail in the report. With regard to the mitigation for the loss of the bingo, as mentioned already, this will be addressed by way of obligating the leisure operator to hold events which could include or be specifically provided for elderly people and people from BAME backgrounds, and to explore the feasibility of providing additional leisure space within the proposed basement on the east site. And just to reiterate, the 106 legal agreement will secure the relevant measures required. This application has been submitted with an environmental impact assessment as required by EIA regulations. The report identifies under several headings the key impacts that are anticipated to arise, to what extent these are adverse and in what measure, or are positive and in what measure. The report concludes that there are both positive and negative impacts. For the majority of environmental impacts, the residual effects of the proposed development, including demolition, construction and operational phases, following mitigation, these would be insignificant. During demolition and construction phases, there are likely to be some adverse minor effects. And from the completed development, there are likely to be related long-term traffic effects, some temporary and some permanent. Set against these, there are a number of long-term beneficial effects of variance in significance, including the provision of housing, new jobs and general enhancement of the local economy. Overall, the development is expected to have a positive environmental impact. As a very significant piece of new urban fabric, the proposal raises issues in relation to design, architecture, impacts on heritage assets and protected views, the latter largely as a result of the tall buildings proposed. The model on display and the images in your members pack and on the screen demonstrate the merits of the scheme. The layout of the development has been well considered and the architecture and detailing is of a high quality. There is a detailed assessment in the report of the various impacts and issues arising, pages 100 to 114. The conclusion is that the scheme is acceptable in this regard and would make a positive contribution to the built environment and regeneration of the Elephant and Castle. The Tabernacle building fronting the Elephant and Castle is a listed building, and a number of conservation areas in addition would be affected. All of these matters are dealt with in the report. Specifically related to the Tabernacle, related works to the Tabernacle, specifically to the exposed northern edge of the building, which will emerge as a result of the demolition of the LCC building. These are subject of the separate listed building consent application, which is also on the agenda. These works are relatively limited in scope and are considered acceptable. The scheme can be described as high density and at 1,512 habitable rooms per hectare. Overall, it's in excess of the upper range of 1,100 habitable rooms per hectare set out in the core strategy. It is at its most dense on the east site, where it has a density of 1,761 habitable rooms per hectare, and on the west site the density is 1,221. However, the scheme is located above a major public transport interchange where intense development is most appropriate. It is considered that the proposal would be of an appropriate height and set within an acceptable amount and quality of public realm. It is of a high standard of accommodation. Although there would be some adverse impacts on daylight and sunlight to neighbouring properties, when weighed against all the many and significant benefits of the scheme, it is considered that the density is acceptable. This proposal is notable for being the first large-scale private rented sector, PRS, or build to rent, scheme in the borough, which will include a new form of affordable housing in the form of discount market rented units. In the first instance, this raises the issue of policy compliance, where the current requirements are for the provision of social and affordable rented accommodation run by traditional housing providers. The housing model under consideration is one where the developer will retain the development as a long-term asset and where apartments will be rented rather than sold. The ownership and management of the affordable units would be similarly retained. There would be no registered social landlord, although the developer is in the process of seeking registered provider status. All the residential, market and affordable will be operated by Get Living London, who manage similar accommodation in Stratford. The affordable provision will be secured in perpetuity. Existing policy in the core strategy, being silent on the subject of PRS, does not allow for this form of affordable housing. As set out in the report, set against existing policy SP6 in the core strategy, the proposal does not comply. The emerging policy in the draft New Southwark Plan does, however, have a policy which deals with this form of affordable housing. That's policy P4. And given the recognition of discount market rent as affordable housing set out in the Mayor's Affordable Housing and Viability SPG, and reference in the NPPF for other low-cost homes for intermediate rent, it's considered that, notwithstanding the current policy position set out in the core strategy, and acknowledging that the draft New Southwark Plan, which supports it, discount market rent can be viewed as an acceptable form of affordable housing. The draft New Southwark Plan requires a minimum of 35% affordable housing, subject to viability, with a 10-year split of 34% social rent, 52% London living rent, and 14% affordable rent for those with household incomes between £60,000 and £90,000. The affordable housing proposal, which was formally revised yesterday and is set out in the addendum, is for 35% in terms of quantum, marginally down from previously proposed 36%, with a distribution of 10% social rent equivalent, 47% London living rent, and 43% for household incomes between 60,000 and 90,000. This represents an improvement on the previous submission by an increase in the London living rent units from 40 to 47%, largely in the main reports. There's a table which says it's bands B and C, which are the second and third income bands, and a proportionate reduction in the higher income units. This still results in a shortfall set against the emerging policy requirement, and so it would remain the case that a viability review would be required to ensure that any uplift in the viability would be captured to improve the distribution of rents in line with the 10-year split set out in emerging policy. Ensuring the distribution of rents is improved towards the lower income levels, as opposed to the more usual approach to increasing the amount of affordable housing, will require regular and detailed monitoring. A monitoring contribution for this specific purpose will be required to be secured in the Section 106. As mentioned in the report, the details of the number and timing of the viability reviews would be specified and secured in the Section 106 legal agreement. The mix-up dwellings, in terms of 1, 2 and 3 bed units, is fully policy compliant. Equally, the proposal satisfies the requirement for wheelchair accessible housing. Across the development, the quality of housing is considered to be of a high standard. There is a predominance of dual aspect, with 60% dual aspect on the east side and 80% on the west. There would be no single aspect north-facing units. In terms of distance between buildings, to ensure adequate levels of privacy, there is a high level of adherence. In one area on the west side, intervening distances are at 8 metres across a street, and in that case the condition is recommended to require details of obscure glazing which will secure privacy but maintain lighting levels. In terms of unit size, there is full compliance. The majority of units have the required level of amenity space, although there is a shortfall on both the east and west sides for some units, and 16 units on the east and 20 units on the west do not have any private amenity space. The shortfall, however, is made up for in the communal provision as set out in detail in the main report. In this context, the amenity provision is considered acceptable. Play space, in addition, is provided on both sides, with some shortfall on the west, which would be again dealt with by means of a contribution. The main report contains a detailed section assessing the daylight and sunlight impacts on neighbouring properties. A wide range of adjoining and nearby properties has been tested, and the cumulative impacts as a result of other developments in the area, such as Skipton House, have also been taken into account. From the various tables, it can be understood that there are impacts, but mainly of an acceptable level. There are two areas where the impact is quite marked, and the report concludes that in the case of Oswin Street and Hales buildings, there would be significant adverse impacts to these properties. Some adverse impacts would also be experienced at Metro Central Heights, but to a lesser degree. In the case of Hales buildings, the percentage losses partly arise due to there being low existing levels for both daylight and sunlight already. In the case of Oswin Street, the difficulty arises partly due to the proximity of the siting of the mansion block, which is actually set back, and also its eastern orientation. The mansion block is set back behind the line of the existing building, and light levels here could probably only be protected with much lower buildings, maybe 2 or 3 stories. The adverse impacts on daylight and sunlight identified in the environmental statement are unfortunate. However, the proposed development is considered to be in line with the vision for the area, and the tall buildings are proportionate in scale for an urbanised central London location. Elephant and Castle is a major transport node, providing a wide range of transport options. Starting with the east side, the shopping centre, as already mentioned, the development provides a new station box for the Northern Line. A new entrance to the station is provided, integrated with the main shopping centre access from the peninsula. This leads to escalators which take you down into a new ticket hall, which will be fitted out by London Underground. Improved access to the Elephant and Castle railway station will be provided through more direct access through the new shopping centre. Servicing access to the new shopping centre has been challenging given the competing demands on the adjacent roads, particularly bearing in mind the number and capacity of bus stops utilising curb space. Ultimately, the servicing access is proposed to be provided immediately west of the viaduct that crosses New Kent Road. This will lead to a basement which will make provision for servicing, deliveries and refuse collection for the various land uses on this eastern site. However, due to the very busy nature of this area, the servicing hours will be restricted to avoid peak periods, and during the week servicing and deliveries will largely occur between 6 p.m. and 8:30 a.m. Access outside these hours will be strictly limited and controlled by a detailed service management plan. Allowances have been made for the particular requirements of the university, with limited movements during peak hours. The proposal as currently described reflects detailed negotiations with officers from Southwark as well as TfL, given the status of New Kent Road as part of their network. As noted in the report, it will require robust monitoring and enforcement. A detailed delivery and servicing management plan will stipulate the various controls that have been negotiated and agreed. These will be enshrined in lease agreements with occupiers, all of which will be secured by the 106 legal agreement. Moving to the west site, servicing and deliveries will be split between a central servicing yard located at grade beneath the main residential towers and dedicated provision along Oswin Street itself in the form of servicing bays. Access to the servicing courtyard will be from the southern end of Pastor Street, accessed from either direction of Oswin Street or Brook Drive. Overall, with the relocation of the university, trip generation associated with servicing vehicles is projected to decrease by about a third over the existing situation. 3 new service bays will be provided on Oswin Street to accommodate deliveries and refuse collection for the residential units and other floor space within the mansion block. Similar to the east site, this will also require a delivery and service management plan. The development will be car-free given its excellent public transport accessibility. The planning obligations section of the report describes an extensive list of obligations to be secured in relation to both sites. The legal agreement will be formed of 2 parts, one for each site, recognising that the phasing is such that the sites come forward in sequence. Alongside financial contributions, there is an extensive range of non-financial obligations in relation to issues including affordable retail, the PRS to be secured for a minimum period, highways works and public realm, landscaping, cycle hire, delivery service management plan, a number of other things. So it is quite a long list, but that will all be covered in the planning obligations and the legal agreement. So kind of to summarise, this is both an ambitious and challenging scheme. It delivers some very significant benefits and key pieces of infrastructure, arguably the most significant one being the new ticket hall for the Northern Line tube station. The delivery of a substantial number of new homes, retail, education, leisure and flexible uses within a new network of pedestrian routes connecting the centre to the surrounding areas, together with the highest quality new urban fabric, meets the aspirations set out in so many policy documents over the years and should be welcomed. Whilst there are some aspects of the proposal which do not wholly accord with the development plan, and these are clearly set out in the officer's report, there is clear weight in favour of approving the scheme, which should be a fitting centrepiece to the ongoing regeneration of the Elephant and Castle. The applications, because there are 2, listed building consent and planning permission, are recommended for approval, subject to conditions, a legal agreement and referral to the Mayor.
Spot on time, Pradine. Brilliant. Are there any questions at this stage you'd like to ask Pradine or the officers in terms of clarification, or shall we allow the objectors to come forward and the applicant and then formulate our questions to the officers at the end of the process? Also recognising we have the GBA people who are specifically here to go through what has been described, I think by Adele, as horrendously complex at one stage. We thought we'd get the people who understand it here to go through it. Are we happy to go there and ask for the... Yep, Adele, if you have a question.
Just a couple of points of clarification in terms of the figures in some of the tables and some of the paragraphs where they don't match. And I just wondered if you could, maybe whilst the presentations are happening, somebody could look up which are the correct figures. So on page page 54, paragraph 31, it says that plot W2 would provide 2,848 square metres of floor space, and then it says 2,484 in the table, so which one is it? And I think similarly there was another one that was the same somewhere further on. Again, it referred to that paragraph. Forgive me, I've lost it now. Some of my sticky tabs have come out. Here we go. So there's another one here, which is the figure is 2,806 square metres, and in the table on page 55. So sorry, that was in paragraph 95 on page 69. It says 2,806, and in the table on 55 it says 2,860. So I wonder if we could just get those clarified. Well,
Can I just give you a briefing case? I've been asked a short comfort break has been requested, and I'm inclined to agree. So if anyone wants to take a very short comfort break, please go now. We'll have a couple of minutes break, go, and that'll give officers the time to actually sort themselves out. Do apologise for this, but I'm not having people. No direct. I will. That includes members of the audience. I think you will see that underneath this Yeah. On everyone's good. For those who are left, we almost hide. We jump out when they come back Victoria, can you just make a note of what you said so when everyone's back to tell you what? Is everyone back now? There are some people from here who have gone out.
We have a queue for the move.
No, I can imagine. I'll wait till people come back. I just worry. No, don't worry.
Yeah.
already got to be or have been circulated so that everybody has got to look at it. You feel particularly agree the developer came forward with a whole pile of papers that he previously sent. Then there's no worry about that because all that information is in the document and has been. Could everyone please, including Michael, turn your name around so people can read it? You got a blank sheet?
No, yours.
Okay, is everyone back in? Who should be back in now? Brilliant. Hands up all those who aren't here. Used to be so low. It doesn't anymore.
Right, just before we took a short break to allow for comfort. Thank you all for getting back as quickly as possible. Absolutely brilliant. A question was raised by Adele about the figures in the report and which were the accurate figures. Victoria was asked a question and she is now going to provide the answer so that we can all hear it.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Morris, you asked for clarification on the table on the top of page 55. The figure given for A1 to A4 and B1 uses should be 2806. So what's in the table is just a typo. And the figure given for D2 use should be 2848.
Is that okay? Are there any further points of clarification that need to be made at this stage, or are we happy to go forward once we've heard the objectors and the applicant and the councillors? Adele?
I had another clarification on figures. I'm sorry, Vicky, I have found it now, that one. And it was, well, it might be to do with, so again, it's on pages 52 and 53, and it might be to do with paragraph 25, whether or not the 1,819 square metres of flexible retail and associated plant space, whether or not that affects it, because I added up the figures in the paragraphs, and they were different from those figures, if you add up the figures in the tables. And I wondered why, which, yeah. so my figures, I added up 13,817, 4,709, that's paragraphs 21, 23, and then 25, 1,819, and I got that to be 20345. And then the table, if you add the two together in the table, excluding the uni one, which is the D1, it comes to 20,027. So that's sort of 318 missing, and I wasn't quite sure where I'd lost them. And it might seem like small numbers, but accuracy in a report like this is absolutely paramount, because I want to know that in the viability assessment, accuracy has been paramount, because it makes a difference.
Okay, we'll have a look at those figures and come back to you later on in the meeting. In the viability report, that would have been based on detailed schedules provided by the architect, so there shouldn't be any typos or miscalculations.
Thank you. I think there is just a small acknowledgement that has to be made at this particular stage. On the 18th of December, we were due to hear this report. I apologise for all those who were there, ready, and for what was then the 11th hour on the 18th of December. It was postponed on the request of Delancey, on the basis that they felt that there was some room for further discussion in the 11th hour, which seems to have lasted the whole of the Christmas period and taken us to the 16th of December. January, 16th of December, that's a very 11th hour. And I think it should be recognised that during that period there has been a considerable exchange between Delancey councillors, officers and others to formulate and clarify some of the report that we finally get to us here, including what from the tweets that I had before me was a helpful meeting at the Bankside and Bermondsey Community Council, which allowed an airing of a number of the issues that we're going to be discussing. I'd also like to say, when it comes down to people saying, and this is the last chance, sadly the grey beard is not an affectation, it is as a consequence of the ageing process. And I am old enough to remember the 2002 failed Bradman scheme, which the council rejected because it was wholly inadequate. I also remember the 2010 St Modwin scheme, again rejected because it was wholly inadequate, and we are now in 2018, and at least the scheme before us has moved from being wholly inadequate to being sufficiently well structured, brought together to be able to put to planning committee. The other two never made it as far as a planning committee. So I think those two things need to be known, and sadly I am that old to remember that many schemes coming forward. So we've had the officers, we've had the questions. Would the objectors like to come forward and sit on the table? And you're going to have to excuse me because I am likely to forget names, and if I end up pointing, if you don't all have to sit at one end, sit in the middle. I mean, it makes it easier for me. It doesn't matter how many of you sit there, Jerry. And again, rest assured, I will ask each of you, or you will each be asked questions to expand on your concerns and what forms your objections after the introduction. Okay, so you don't have to cram it into the 3 minutes. If you are content, I'm happy for you to, from my left, so your right, sir, you start with your name and introduction. You're going to have to move the mic along a bit. You give your names and then I'll... Sorry? Oh, that's a bugger. Is that my...
Oh, sorry.
No, I think we've just... Oh, no. Failed at the first hurdle. The technology's letting us down. So if you start this end and say who you are and what your interest is, you will then be asked specific questions to expand on that so that you all have a chance, okay? Yep.
Hello everyone, my name is Mohammed Zahid and I'm a trader. I run 3 small units in the shopping centre.
Mohammed?
Yeah.
Trader.
My name is Jerry Flynn. I'm here on behalf of the 35% campaign, the Elephant Amenity Network, and my interest is affordable housing and the viability assessment.
Yeah, my name is Padria Roman Velasquez, and I am the Chair of Trustees and founder of Latin Elephant, a charity that's working with BME traders in Elephant and Castle.
Good evening all, my name is Imad Mujahid. I represent all the traders inside Elephant and Castle Shopping Centre through Elephant and Castle Traders Association, and we basically here to talk about our affordable relocation strategy and compensation plan.
Yeah, you just lean over a bit, Patrick.
Patrick Duffy, I'm the managing...
You've got to turn this one off, sorry. Okay. Yeah, it's ping pong.
fine. Patrick Duffy, the Managing Director of Palatial Leisure, who operate Palace Bingo Clubs and bowling. We have 100,000 square feet, which is one entire floor of the shopping centre.
Jennifer Marshall, Chair of Hill Street TRA and long-term resident, here to answer questions pertaining to daylight sunlight issues with in Oswin Street.
Fantastic.
Thank you. Adriana Hoyos. I got a business in Elephant and Castle, and my interest is, of course, referring with the Elephant Quarter.
Sorry, I didn't catch your name.
Adriana Hoyos.
Adriana. Cheers now, thank you. Right. Jennifer, would you be happy to kicking off on Oswin Street?
Yes, please. Yes.
Yes.
Any questions?
No. Basically, oh God, no, it's the open-ended question. What particular concerns have you got in Oswin Street about this development?
Well, the principal concerns are that the properties to the west of the current London College of Communication will suffer from a great loss of daylight sunlight, and also will be very, very affected by the heavy construction and traffic. We've calculated there'll be over 400 trucks a week going up and down Oswin Street, which will impact. But pertaining to the issues of daylight and sunlight, VSC, a vertical sky conformant test, identified 40% of the rooms would have substandard daylight, and that calculated to be 97 out of 100 houses in Oswin Street, which would be affected. There was a justification that the new properties have multiple windows, but this doesn't justify.
Is there anything further you wish to add? Over and above daylight, sunlight and construction?
No, that's it.
Brilliant.
Hope I've kept to the time.
No, this is your time.
Thank you.
You'll have to turn your mic off.
Oh, yes.
I mean, it's a boring game of ping pong. It's not voice activated like most. We'll move into the right century soon. Do any members have questions of Jennifer? Hamish?
Yeah, I do. Although it's not actually on one of the issues that you've raised, but I feel like you might be the best person here to ask this of. I wanted to ask about parking. I know there have been some concerns raised about both loss of parking on the site and possible impacts of the development itself. As a local resident, are you able to just comment on parking in the vicinity at present and whether there are any concerns that you have stemming from the development? As to any impact of parking on nearby roads?
Well, of course, it will be impacted because it will be impacted because of obviously there has been, and since all the new developments have gone up at the Elephant and Castle, we've seen an increase in delivery vans, the Amazon, etc., etc. So yes, so parking will be, and particularly there's a large number of disabled and elderly people there. So yes, it will be affected.
Yep. Minor technical follow-ups because I'm not aware. I understand there's a controlled parking zone in the area at CP Centre. You have to have a permit. Is that sort of it's being reviewed at the moment? Is it?
It has.
I wanted to know really whether it's sort of 24/7 or whether it's just weekdays, daytime, evenings.
Weekdays.
Just weekdays during the day.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
To the best of my knowledge. Yes.
Yeah, you're right. Michael.
Thank you, Chair. Could I just ask, as a long-standing resident, perhaps you could give some of the history, because Oswin Street, it's clear looking at that you're at the moment the houses on the west side are going to be affected by the enormous things that are going up on the right-hand side.
Yes, very much so.
What's been there over the last 10 or 20 years on the east side? Because presumably is it cleared land at the moment, or is it?
It's residential.
What height does it go to at the moment?
Oh, sorry.
No, it's all right.
It's residential property. I'm sorry, I am not available. I'm sorry, I don't have that information. I should have it. I'm sorry, I don't
No, that's all right. He's asking
have it. But
Well, yeah, so not what the current development's going to be. What's currently there at the moment on that side? You don't.
it's residential property.
And what sort of height is it at the moment? Is it 2 stories? Or?
Yes, 2-storey.
Okay.
Michael, I think there's been a bit of a confusion here, and I think that's a question that we need to be asking the developer as well, because it's the university building that is opposite Osborne Street at the moment, and that's set back, isn't it?
Yes, that's right. Yes.
Rather than it being residential. Sorry, I could see a number of people looking quite befuddled.
Yes, sorry.
No, that's perfectly all right. Are there any further questions you would like to ask Jennifer? We might come back to you, Jennifer. The key bit that you certainly talked about, I will be asking the developer a question about daylight and sunlight, and particularly the impact on Oswin Street, and we will listen to their light person's explanation, and then we can actually ask a further question of officers, so prepare yourselves. Okay? And the other one, which will be a question around construction management, and people coming and going and making sure that any impact on transport is mitigated, and well, at least you can understand what people are saying is going to be happening, and we will look to see whether we can strengthen it in any way from our own experience. And there is a longer term bit about deliveries in the longer term and how that is managed. And I know there are a number of people who have spent hours on some applications looking at the turning circles on vans with great interest for a long time. Adele.
Thank you. Chair, if I may just to revisit the traffic and transport issues, because obviously the Elephant and Castle Leisure Centre and One the Elephant have all used Osborne Street as their construction traffic route, and I just wondered if you could tell me how residents found that process, and just remind me how long that went on for as well.
They found it very, very traumatic and horrendous, because they noticed an increase in the dust and the impact on their health issues, and it went on for about 4 or 5 years. Yes, and it was very intolerable, and they expect this to be worse, and yes, it's consistent. Yes.
Certainly interrogate people along those lines. And thank you. Right, the next bit, as we started with housing, I'm going to move over to Jerry, who seemed ever so pleased he was coming second. Jerry.
Yes.
And then I'm going to do Patrick, and then we'll do the traders at the end. Jerry, do you want to? Yeah, no, that's probably best. Sorry.
Thank you. I would first of all like to refer the committee to paragraph 53 of the planning report. Which says that the development plan is the London plan, the core strategy and the Save Southwark plan, which do not support build to rent or discounted market rent. It is an emerging policy, which the report says in several places should only be given limited weight, which the committee should be considering. It is the established policy, the development plan, as it's established in the London plan, the core strategy and the Safe Southwark plan. I would like then the committee to take a look at paragraph 217.
which tells us that an equalities impact assessment has not been conducted to establish whether discount market rent would not disproportionately adversely impact on those with protected characteristics. It says in the last sentence, as part of this process, an equality impact assessment of the intermediate housing list proposals will be undertaking, or would be undertaking, to ensure that there is no disproportionate impact. I think that the committee needs to know this evening whether there is going to be a disproportionate impact if it's to take a good decision on this application. I would further like the committee to consider paragraph 345 in the officer's report. The application fails to conform to the development plan on 3 important counts. The tenure split does not meet core strategy requirements, the established policy. There is no social rented accommodation. It does not conform to emerging policy, New Southwark Plan P4, for build to rent. It does not meet the Mayor's preference for a majority of rents at London living rent. I would also like to draw the attention of the committee to paragraphs 366, 368, which deal with the viability question.
Sorry, good. What was the paragraph number again?
366 to 368. 366 says the council valuation experts had advised that the applicant's offer of 36% affordable housing could be achieved with a fully compliant tenure mix, predicated upon an initial internal rate of return of 6.5%, which through rental growth, etc., would increase to 10 to 12% upon practical completion. Then in 368, it is said the applicant has conceded these points, has conceded that 7.15% initial internal rate of return plus annual growth to 11% over the construction period is acceptable. There appears to be agreement on this. And yet, in paragraph 367, there is a clawback review proposed. I do not understand why a clawback review is necessary. I do not understand why a fully compliant tenure mix is not delivered, at least in compliance with emerging policy P4 NSP. It does seem to me as if the clawback policy shifts the risk of not achieving the higher rates of return to the local authority in the form of lost affordable housing. I would then like the committee to consider paragraph 375, or to note paragraph 375, where the officer's report states the complexity of any viability review, and then in paragraph 376 refers to what a complicated process it would be, and then in 377 says that the ability to apply any uplift has some challenges, is doubtful, to the lower level of rent levels. All in all, I think we have an application here which fails on so many points, notwithstanding what the chair said earlier. I don't see why this committee is actually considering it.
Right. Members of the committee, any questions they'd like to ask Jerry? Bill?
No, but I'd just like to thank him for actually explaining all that so concisely, and I found it very helpful to have that attention to that.
No, absolutely. And certainly the issue about emerging weight in terms of policies, we can raise that with the officers. The disproportionate impact, which was paragraph 217, is something I think GBA will be asking specific questions at a later stage when we come back to you.
similarly with the tenure split and the series of paragraphs 366 to 368, and what you pointed out are how those have shaped up, and then the conversation about the viability reviews and the clawback.
Yes, thank you. And I just one final point on the addendum, paragraph 3.21. There is a marginal improvement on the affordable housing offered, but it still falls short of the of P4.
Yeah, no. As you were well aware, sort of we've tried to move it in the right direction, but whether we've moved it as far as we can to everyone's satisfaction is another matter altogether, and is quite obviously an issue for us to bear in mind today. Adele.
Sorry, Chair, I've just got one last question. So, obviously, there's a lot of concern about not delivering the quantum of social rented housing, in particular in this development. But can I ask, just in terms of the whether they're properties for sale or properties for rent, is there any kind of objection overall to it being a fully PRS scheme as opposed to a scheme that would have set for sale properties?
Yes, there is. We don't believe that the need for build to rent and discount market rent has actually been demonstrated, as opposed to the demand. There's a demand for private housing or private rented housing that people can live in securely. But nonetheless, we don't think it's been demonstrated that discount market rent and build to rent are preferable as tenures to other tenures such as social rented housing, and we have submitted that in more detail in our written objection.
Yeah, and that's the long one that you signed off at the end.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you very much indeed, Jerry. Is there any further questions that people would like to ask? Patrick, you are the next one in line, and then I'm going to deal with the traders, because Patria represents Latin elephant, and your Imad represents the traders, and the other two are individual traders. Have I got that right?
That's correct.
Brilliant. So Patria, you're next. Then Imad. Then Patrick.
Okay. Obviously, the lawyers have put in all the technical points that in the objection, so you'll have them, so I'm not going to labour on about those, but I just want to give some facts on the bingo club itself and how it is broken up. It has some 10 to 10,500 visits between the bingo and the bowling, split roughly 7,500 to the bingo, 3,000 to the bowling. To maintain our position, and the legal costs so far in our case are over £70,000 just in the last year, and obviously it will escalate as this progresses. I want to just put some figures in of my level of investment in the Elephant and Castle as it stands in making what is the most successful bingo club in the UK. In the last 18 years, my rent and service charge has been in around the £20 million mark. My liability for what's left on the lease is in excess of £7 million. I have invested many millions of pounds into refurbishment, despite reports of the place closing in 2006, 2007. And we would, of course, be making serious investment in the near future if we had any security of tenure or any idea of what might be going on. Bingo has not got the most glamorous image. As I said, I often wish James Bond had played bingo instead of going to a casino. But I can tell you this, it's got the value, and the value in any community. It's inexpensive, it's a great social activity, it's safe, it's secure for people of all ages and sexes, it's ethnically diverse. We act responsibly across all aspects of gambling, we have, in actual fact, the lowest and almost insignificant instances of problem gambling. It provides the greatest social benefits of all activities. It serves the older population in the afternoons, and not only the younger, but whole families in the evenings. The ratio of male and female about 55% of our business, male 45%. Ethnically, at the moment, Afro and Afro-Caribbean represents about 50% of my business. We have some of the youngest players in the UK, all out enjoying themselves for inexpensive food, drink, and the chance, and you must understand this, that the Elephant and Castle is the biggest driver of bingo that affects all bingo clubs throughout the UK. Most national linked games, of which there are many in a day, is broadcast from the Elephant and Castle and supported by the largest ticket sales. It isn't just the Elephant and Castle. If you're a bingo player, there isn't one in the country that wouldn't know about the London Palace and the Elephant and Castle. And that has not been by any mean achievement. But you have to understand that if you annihilate us, which seems to be on the cards, you will be taking away not only bingo from Southwark and from London, and the most successful and the largest flat floor club, you will in actual fact have an impact on bingo throughout the country. If you do grant this application tonight, you will surgically, and I mean surgically, remove us, annihilate us, and pretend we don't exist. We don't have the most glamorous of images, as I said, but we are very effective. You will destroy the social life of thousands of people, right? Your people, my people, not Delancey's people, I can assure you. We may not be glamorous, right, but we are important. The bowling is a thriving business built up from very little. As we all know, it failed and was taken over by us, and with our strict operation and being fully compliant, it's a very successful and safe operation, offering affordable activity, of the most affordable activity of its type in London. Just these two businesses, which is the entire Elephant and Castle on one level, add value and quality of life to many thousands of people each week. Not just now and then, and I've listened intently to saying that a new leisure operator, right, would offer some form of bingo.
Or an old operator.
Sorry?
Well, a more experienced operator, not old. Yourself could continue.
Well, perhaps, but I think it shows, or it sounded to me, like a great lack of understanding of the operation of that bingo club. It isn't something ad hoc. It is something that is real. It is something that is part of people's lives. Right? We have people, we're the only bingo club in the country where people queue up at 10:30 every morning. Any of you can come and see. Do they come there to gamble at 10:30 in the morning? Maybe one or two would, but they come there, right, for their friends, to meet. It's a social event. Bingo is not all about gambling. In actual fact, I believe it's less about gambling and more about people's social lives. Right? But what I'm saying to you tonight is, if you obliterate us, bingo and bowling, right, you will be doing a great disservice to Southwark, to the people you serve, and it would be an out-and-out travesty. I have to say that as a council, and I've said it to your chief executive today, right, there is no more that I or that any council should want from a leisure operator. And I tick all the boxes, from responsible gambling to fully compliant, only last week on inspection, with Southwark's licensing. I tick all the boxes, and I don't see that Delancey tick any. And I would say that I was here too in 2002 for and again with St Modwen, who have to be the worst landlords in creation. I'm delighted to say it publicly. And maybe those two applications were wholly inadequate. And I would welcome development, but this application, if it's not wholly inadequate, it's just inadequate. Thank you very much.
I understand the differentiation. Are there any questions that people like? Lucas?
Thanks, Patrick. I apologise if I don't know the answer to this, because I have attended the bingo hall at least once. Can you confirm whether there are any fixed odds betting machines, and therefore, on the basis of that, whether you feel that by attending the bingo hall, it's a better form of gambling?
We are not allowed. Fixed odds betting terminals are for betting shops only, and they have been a source of great problem throughout the gaming industry. We do have a number of machines, etc., in the bingo club, but bingo is the best value night out for most people, but certainly in gaming, the best value. And I have to say that at the Elephant and Castle, you do get the biggest prize money in all of the UK.
Oh gosh, Lorraine, Hamish.
Patrick, thank you for coming this evening. I'd like to ask two questions. One, have you been made any offers like for the bingo and the bowling alley?
My solicitors and agents are dealing, but if there is anything that has been offered in terms of alternative accommodation, the only way I could suggest it is it would be like moving out of a mansion and into a garden shed. Is the only thing that I've been offered, and most of it, in actual fact, has just been nonsense.
I think we're now straying out of the planning. No, it's okay. I mean, I understand where the question may arise, but it's not strictly a planning land use question, which is about more the would you be willing to look at the D2 use that is coming up in the scheme, which may be able to accommodate a bingo operator in the future, because it's the same D-class use as a cinema or any other use.
Yes, one of the reasons I find this application totally inadequate, I have to say, from operating for almost 20 years at the Elephant, I don't think that perhaps everybody other than Delancey may realise what they're sitting on. In actual fact, the potential, the leisure potential at the Elephant and Castle is absolutely huge, right? You know, Delancey may own the land, right? If it's like an oil well underneath the Elephant, you have the tap, you can control it. I welcome development and redevelopment for the people of Southwark, and particularly the leisure for all the people that I represent or that use my business. But I think that there's a lack of understanding of the potential for the leisure activity at the Elephant itself. Other than that, you would throw out this application, go to Delancey and say, go back to the drawing board, have a fresh look at this, because it doesn't give us what we need.
My second question is, do you object to any regeneration of the shopping centre? If not, what credible alternative plan would you propose to the developers and to your customers?
The developers bought the shopping centre of St Modwyn, who were never serious people in the first place, and they bought it and they paid a decent price for it. I do not deny Delancey a profit on the deal. What I do say to Delancey is, you know what you bought, right? My leases were in place. The bingo club, the bowling was there when you bought it. You knew that if you want this development, that you had to take that into consideration in your plans. What is actually happening to the bingo and the bowling and the 10,000 people, or the 10,000 visits, some of them would be repeat visits, of course, those people are just being totally ignored. Their entire social life, their way of life, thrown like dish rags, thrown in the bin.
I think we now slightly strayed there, Patrick. The hyperbole is beginning to take. We understand that you are an important part of the leisure industry, an important part of the scheme, and I think some of us do understand the importance and the scope and that bingo has in people's lives. I think you try and keep it down to land uses and answering the questions.
I accept that,
being thrown
but there is no provision, sir. There is no provision for an alternative bingo club, and a 1,000-seater cinema doesn't do the trick either, or a 500 capacity music venue. The Elephant deserves better than this. And if they go to the drawing board, I'm sure they can come up with something. And no, I welcome development. I want to see the Elephant have a proper scheme and development. I think Lancy, if they're minded to, can provide it. This council can certainly control it. And the likes of me, we are more than prepared to invest in it.
Brilliant. Who was it next? Hamish. And then Adele.
It's on a similar theme, but just bringing it back to the land use part. I just wanted to clarify my understanding of both your presentation and the report, which is that there's a decrease of more than 50% of D2 class land use within the proposed scheme compared to the current use of the shopping centre site, and that's obviously the use class which affects you. Is my understanding correct that it would be not possible for you to re-provide the facilities you currently offer within the available D2 class space of the scheme as proposed?
No, by reducing it, if anything, we need more, because if you viewed the entire leisure activity, which I would welcome a cinema and I would welcome a music venue, but what's paramount to me is, of course, the bingo club. And the many thousands of people who have supported me throughout the years, but it's not about that, as the chair says. It's about this application does not fill the brief. It just doesn't go anywhere near it. But the reality is that the arrogance of this application means that we have virtually been ignored.
I do find that hard to believe, given seeing most of the correspondence that you've been engaged in, and the council has been in a series of discussions. To say that you've been ignored is a bit...
I'm not saying that the council has ignored me, but I would say to a great extent Delancey has. Sorry, so maybe I'm not allowed to say that.
We can take it up with them. Just in terms of the figures, I struggle. This bit is just a yes-no bit. There's between 7,000 and 7,500 people using your bingo on a weekly basis. Am I correct in thinking that?
Yes, that's visits, not people.
That's
people
visits.
Twice, yes.
So people can visit 2 or 3 times during the day and still be counted as...
Twice a day, and then there's a number of people who are not recorded because they're just coming in for a very brief time.
Right, yeah. So how many people do you know use the facility during the course of the week, rather than the number of people who number of visits that are made?
Yes, between 3,000 and 4,000. That's for the bingo only.
Right.
Bowling is different.
Is that spread equally over the period of the week?
We obviously have some incredibly busy sessions like Sunday night, Friday night. The rest is pretty gradual. The afternoons are pretty evenly spread, except Saturday would of course be the busiest. In the bowling, the Friday and Saturday nights would be the peak times.
And let's like on a Saturday, and that's probably one of your Saturday afternoon, one of the bigger times. How many people do you expect to have in the bingo area at that time, at any one time?
It's usually somewhere in the region of 400 to 500 people.
The reason I'm asking these questions is because there's been a lot of stuff said and a lot of stuff repeated in the objections, and people have made claims of 7,500 pensioners using it during the course of the week, which, given the number of pensioners that live in the north of the borough, that would be one of them visiting twice. You currently have a venue, from what I understand from your website, that has 2,000 seats.
We have 3,000 seats, but we allow 2,000 in.
This is the bit that I then want to understand. If you're at the highest level, you've got 300 people attending, 400 to 500 people on a Saturday session. That means you've got you've got some spare capacity there.
Oh yes, absolutely. When the reason for the spare capacity is that when you would get something like 50% of your capacity, which is 3,000, if you're to get in 1,100 people, which is normal for a last Sunday, say, you're pretty well full because people spread themselves out, and that's what it was designed for. Our exits, we would never allow more than 2,000 people in, but in order to maintain a level of comfort, we have 3,000 actual seats, or 2,800, whatever.
Yeah, no. So, I'm still grappling with this, Patrick, because you have a venue which can contain 2,000 people. The maximum you have in terms of safe management and turnover at any one time is 1,000 people. So when do you meet 2,000 people in that building at one time? A 2,000 person seating. It's just getting some idea about the space that you are suggesting you need.
Right. The space that I actually need is less than what I've got. We accept that, but there's a very good reason why we put it there, because, for instance, when we refurbished in 2006, 2007, there was an area called the Faraday Suite, which was part of that floor. So for technical reasons, almost like the bowling, I took it in order for security reasons to protect my bingo. But the reality is I expanded the amount of seating I've got, which in the main means that people can be quite territorial in bingo about where they sit. So what we allow is, we've allowed a great degree of comfort at the Elephant Castle, but yes, I could settle for something just for the bingo alone, just about 50,000 square foot with 20,000 for the bowling, and that has been my position all along.
No, I just wanted to make sure that we were clear in terms of, because a number of claims have been made about the space that's used, the number of people using it at any one particular time, and so some of the figures when you multiply them up are quite fanciful, and I certainly feel as if I made a wrong career decision at one stage in terms of health.
Yes, no, the thing about it is the people who have benefited most out of the way I operate is probably the landlord, because I have maintained a very secure operation on that level, and of course I have protected the bingo above all else, and we do, in addition to everything else we do in the bingo, from our social responsibility point of view, we do give people a greater degree of comfort.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Are there any further questions? Right, Patria. Is there anything you would like to say? I will ask the question now as you're moving. Is there anything you'd like to say on behalf of Latin Elephant and the groups that you represent, particularly relating to the objections you have made?
I would like to follow some issues about equalities in relation to not just the bingo hall, but the traders and the sort of social and cultural function of the indoor space that is going to be lost in the shopping centre. It's not just the bingo hall that provides and has a social and cultural value, it's also the indoor space that is going to be lost, and there has not been a particular sort of equalities impact assessment on how that space and the loss of that space and the impact that it will have on groups of protected characteristics are those ones that have been identified in relation to age and to group. It is a social space. Throughout the years, there have been various activities in the corridors, right? People's Bureau, which has been supported by the applicant, was one of them. We organise Migrants Contribute there as well. And it was a very social, convivial sort of space. It is a space where people go. And, if you're alone in your house, this is where you will go and know that you will meet people. So it is that. And this has implications for equalities, partly because there's also a recent UN report that sort of claims that there are human rights sort of impact of the regeneration and gentrification for the dynamic and the diversity of a cultural of the diversity of an area. And in this particular case, the loss of that indoor space, the loss of services and goods will have an impact on BME groups and people and older people as well. So it's not just the bingo hall. I think the whole site fulfills that function, and that social and cultural value has been identified as a human right. People from these groups have a right to these spaces. There's also been identified in this UN report that another sort of human right issue here is a right of minority groups to equal participation in economic, social and cultural rights. So if you take a space in which they participate in what is migrant ethnic economies, in which they participate in the cultural and social life, then they will be diminished in terms of their equal rights to participate in economic life with the UK, social and cultural rights. So I do think that what Patrick is raising has implications on the Equalities Act. And there are several instances in the report, and I can sort of point you out to some of the paragraphs. But at the conclusion, if I go backwards, 745, paragraph 745 clearly states that there's adverse impacts for BME groups and groups of older people as well. Paragraph 227, paragraph 226, paragraph 214, 157, and 156. And these are some of the issues that have been ignored in some of the equalities impact assessment. Another issue that I feel that has been completely ignored in equalities impact assessment is the loss of Latin American businesses. This is not only Southwark, the first borough to have recognized the Latin Americans as a minority group for monitoring purposes in the borough. It's the second borough in London with the highest proportion of Latin American population, and it holds the largest Latin American business cluster with 96 businesses in the area. The shopping centre and Arches 6 and 7 represents 26 businesses of Latin American origins that will be lost, which means a quarter of the Latin American business cluster will be lost. My question is, has an impact assessment been done for the Latin American community in particular and for Latin American groups? No. And it's a loss of a quarter of what is one of the biggest, or the biggest Latin American business cluster in London. So I do think that this is merited and is needed, and it does not fulfill and it falls short the impacts, equality impacts assessment and community assessment as well. So on that aspect of the equalities impact assessment, I also feel the Arches 6 and 7 are two Latino sort of businesses, and the impact assessment on them has not been carried either, the loss of those two spaces. There's lack of transparency of ownership, for example, and who is going to be liable to compensate these businesses. And then we are also concerned about the relocation strategy and the fact that it's insufficient. We don't think that the mitigation strategies that have been outlined in the report considers secondary economy and the supply chains. These are also loss of businesses, and that hasn't been accounted for. If this planning application is to be approved at all today, in order for the 10% relocation, which has been an achievement in terms of the oppositions that we've done, in terms of affordable retail space, we also need a condition for additional fund that could allow for the traders that qualify to return to the site. There is no fund for the return in the site. And I think those are some of the main issues, but there's also other issues in terms of the relocation strategy that are not quite compliant in terms of like-for-like and in terms of fragmentation of the business cluster, a desire that they've expressed before as well.
Thank you. Has anyone any questions of Patria? I have. Oh, sorry, Dan.
I was just going to say again, thank you for setting it out so clearly for us.
I've just got two questions. One of them is in your earlier comments, you were suggesting it was a breach of UN human rights by taking away indoor space. I take it from that you're referring to the shopping mall and the space between the shops.
The corridors.
The corridors, okay. But there still will be indoor space on the site, whatever might happen in the future. Yep, got that. And the next comment you made, that it was not transparent about how the compensation may be, or that process is there.
For the arches in particular, because I'm referring to the arches in particular because at the moment that is Network Rail, and the leases are under Network Rail. So either we don't know that there's been a deal, or who is liable to compensate these businesses? Is it Delancey? Is it Network Rail? But it's in Delancey's application, so that's why we think that the relocation fund that's been given is not clear enough into whose responsibility is this.
I will ask someone who's going to really love being asked that question. It's the landlord who ultimately has the responsibility rather than the appropriate landlord.
So the landlord at the moment, it's for the arches is Network Rail, but it is in the planning application. So it's a question for Delancey to answer. Have they got ownership or leases or transfer of that property?
But for brevity's sake, we shall ask that question of Delancey to actually clarify that particular issue. Did you make a note of it? Have I got to remember it, Delancey?
We've got a note, yeah.
Got a note, brilliant. Okay, that's clarified that bit. Is there any further questions? Right, we now move to Iman. And you represent all the traders, or just some of the traders?
We've established Elephant and Castle Traders Association about nearly a year and a half ago.
Yep, tell us what your particular concerns are about this application.
I've been searching and researching online.
Briefly as well.
Yeah, I'll be very brief. It is a planning policy that you reach an agreement with current traders inside the shopping centre for approval of this application. So all the talk has been done by Delancey. However, I would like to clarify that none of the traders have contractual agreement with Delancey. We have a contractual agreement with Elephant and Castle Property Limited. So basically, the direct point is that the application that's put forward by Elephant and Castle Property Limited to the council is basically going to mean that all of the businesses that inside Elephant and Castle Shopping Centre and in the area around will lose the goodwill of their business. The value of their business will completely be destroyed. If I wanted to sell my business tomorrow, I can't. So we worked it out to be a figure of about minimum of £100,000. These businesses have been working and built a business really hard inside the shopping centre and around the area for more than 10 years, at least 10 years. So there comes a developer that wants to develop the area and basically put forward on the application a package that basically means under £10,000 for a business as a support. And this is basically not acceptable whatsoever. So recently I went to a meeting for a presentation, and I listened to the presentation last week by Mr. Peter Jones, and he made a brilliant presentation about the application and how London Transport is basically in support of the application. The London College of Communication is in support of the application, which triggered me to revisit the application one more time. And what I can find, if I can draw your attention to page number 147.
Which page?
147. Paragraph 7. Yeah, paragraph 767. It's the last paragraph on page 147. And it's talking about the rebuilding of the underground station or the ticket system. However, the last line says, concept design for new ticket hall.
Sorry.
Paragraph 767, because there are no page numbers, it's just...
It's on page 192.
Paragraph 767, which talks about transport. Yeah.
Yet TfL has a direct interest. Is it not?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we got there.
Sorry about the page numbering. The last line says concept design for new ticket hall progressing well, but there's a funding gap. However, if we go back in the report to point 723, point 723, is talking about the Mayor CIL, Community Infrastructure Levy, and basically the payment, how Southwark CIL payment of £15,804 should be required. So there is a is that?
15 million.
15 million, yeah, sorry. So there is a funding gap for London Transport, and basically the CIL, Community Infrastructure Levy, is expected to pay 15 million. So we're wondering where the money is going to come from. So basically, now we have businesses here that worked really hard for years to build an income for their families. However, none of the application addresses apart from 670 or 650,000 pounds to support all of these businesses. Yet there is money in the pot that can help basically, and it's going towards the transport, which is not really my area. But what I'm referring to here is basically that you have constituents of your borough that basically are going to suffer severe financial losses for at least a year of rebuilding the business again as a result of the application. And basically, the report completely ignores these people, doesn't ignore them fully, but it fails to meet their requirements. Yet the plan application is being recommended. So most of the businesses that I know, they support at least 3 families. Mom and dad, son and daughter, 12 people in a family, in these 3 families. Multiply that by how many businesses that will suffer?
We're now straying really quite a long way from a planning issue. You made your point that you're not content with the compensation as it's currently laid out, and the fund that's there to support businesses moving, which is in the order of 700,000. You are now attempting to negotiate a slightly larger amount on the basis that Transport for London are getting a £15 million contribution to deal with the travelling public.
No, sir.
That's what it sounded like to me.
Can I elaborate if I may?
very, very briefly, because we are now straying off a planning issue and on to a commercial discussion that is between landlord and tenant and should not be conducted through a planning committee.
I can assure you this is not between the landlord and tenant. This is a planning issue which addresses the livelihood of your constituents in their area. We say in business there is an offer and offeree. There's an offer to be made and to be accepted. None of this has happened. We have not accepted any offer by the landlord or by the developer. The offer that was put forward is unacceptable for us, and we have put our offer in the table and it was ignored. We've asked for £100,000 per trader, it was ignored.
Sorry, you... No, I'm afraid you haven't quite grappled the comment that I made, which is that's not a planning issue. That's a discussion between the tenant and landlord. The local authority at the moment is exercising its planning responsibilities in setting out the affordable retail element, which is policy compliant, and for those people who would not otherwise enjoy the benefits of the full relationship between a permanent tenant and the landlord and the rights that accrue to them under the legislation, the negotiation that the council has undertaken on your behalf to set up a fund and support for those traders who are going to be disadvantaged as a consequence of the development. That's the council's extent of the council's responsibility. It does not extend to the individual commercial discussions that a landlord, between a tenant and a landlord, and the various protections you get underneath the tenancies you have.
No, sir, I didn't say anything about the relationship between tenants and landlord. I merely said that it's a planning policy to reach an agreement with the current traders. It's a planning policy to reach an agreement with current traders. Is it a planning policy or not? Is it a point for the planning policy?
Sorry, this is now becoming a dialogue between me and you. I'm not asking you a question. I've asked you the question and got the clarification from what you've been saying. I will now give other members of the committee to ask questions if they wish to. Yeah, just in a second. Would any other member of the committee like to ask a question of Emmett? Patricia, try and make it sound like a comment rather than a question.
Okay,
What comment would you like to make in this job?
Yes, I wondered how... I can't do it. Anyway, the 700,000, which is part of the relocation fund, what does that include? What has been taken into account?
No, we can go through that and ask that question about how we would like to see that unfold and the checks and balances we put in place and how we calculated it and how we would like to see the heads of terms so that people can understand on what criteria that's going to be allocated, and that will be a question we ask later of officers if we get the opportunity and or the... Yeah,
and that relates to my sort of comment earlier that does not include relocating back to the new site, for example.
Brilliant. Are there any further questions? I mean, no. Sir, have you got a... No, mine. No? Oh, come on. Adriana, have you got anything you would like to add?
Well,
just makes it a little
yes, thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'm not going straight reading any technical terms. I think my fellow friends already make the points in what is the planning application and all the law and rules. But I really want to take the opportunity to, as an independent trader that I am, or business, there is no opportunity for us to relocate as a cluster, as Patria mentioned it, and I don't know what the Lancy have planned for me, where I'm going to be ubicated, what I'm going to do. My main business is always with the Latin community. I'm a Colombian professional lawyer, also qualified here, and they are my main clients. So if they're not going to be in the area, what I'm going to be doing? And it's just not me, as Imad mentioned, they are every single one. So I'm asking the community to really wear their shoes and think what are we going to be doing in December when we're not going to be there, and it's not just it's not me, but every single family. We asked, and the council and Delancey promised in several meetings area which we supposed to call Latin Quarter, and apparently it's been forgotten for all these discussions. We haven't heard anything about that. That was one of the points that we thought we are going to be relocating in one of those areas. You are suggesting that after the application has been approved, you are going to discuss, or we are going to discuss several points, but it doesn't make any sense at all that you sign an agreement and then you go to discuss the terms. It doesn't make any sense for me or for anyone. We cannot be thinking to going out of the shopping center, or traders going out of the shopping center, and then start to discuss where are we going to be relocated, because it's not a specific and clear point where are we going to be. And I don't know what I'm going to be doing in January. I remember in the last CCL meeting, we were told that we should be very grateful for the 35% that we are being.
Sorry, it's more of a presentation rather than sort of touching on any planning issues. I mean,
okay, sorry.
I think we need to focus on, because there's an awful lot of people here, and
and
very specific issues which are about any harms that may accrue as a consequence of the development as it is currently being considered.
Okay, another consequence will be that it looks like that we are not taking into account that all of these families that are going to be out of business, they are going to be becoming a burden for the government and for the council. We are going to start to request your support in benefits or any other help which you can give us, and it's several of us. It doesn't look like you are taking this into account. It's more like we are really promoting a social exclusion within the community. That's all.
No, thank you. Thank you for focusing. I've just got a couple of general questions, and sort of. Oh, sorry, Michael.
Yes, Chair. I don't know whether whether you've seen this map. We've been presented with a picture which shows refers to local independence, and so I wondered if that was the plan, was that they were to be relocated. Oh, we're going to see if you can see it as well. Here it comes, yes, it's like the old microfiche there. Right, down on... Chair, you're much younger, I'm sure. Yes, so you're currently located actually in the Elephant and Castle itself, aren't you? In the centre. Yeah. And what this map shows is it talks about, if you go down towards the right, there's a thing called local independence. So that's down on what's presumably already being developed down towards the Haygate. Do you think that might be where you're being invited to relocate? Because what I'm suggesting is that I'd be interested to know what you say, but obviously we're going to follow it up with Delancey when they appear to see if that is what they have in mind. So I just wondered if you thought that would be inappropriate.
As a trader, we don't have a specific place to move yet, like very clear, because I understand traders need to start to be closing or moving out by June if this is going to be approved, and everything is going to be out, everyone is going to be out by December, and but that's one of the points I said, you're supposed to approve it, and then we start to see exactly the relocation.
Well, we're being encouraged to, I'm surmising at the moment, that we're being encouraged to take it that is the kind of place that they might be talking about, and I'm wanting to know from you, is that close enough to you where you are at the moment for your customers still to be able to find you?
As long as we still as a cluster, and as long as the Latin community could be in the area as a group, which are my main clients, I'm happy with that.
Can I just extend on that comment? That's speculative in there. There's no agreement, no contracts in place, and I believe that's Lend-Lease's. So there is no retail strategy for the area as such, and these are just plans. So,
but there is an affordable element in there.
Right, but there is an opportunity here this evening for us as a committee to see if we can find out if this is the kind of thing that is acceptable to people in your situation, and then we have an opportunity to talk to someone else who may or may not control that land, but if we can move things forward, that might be helpful. So I was just asking if that's close enough
and also it's within the new developments, and it's this idea of clustering, which is really important because there is a chain.
Sorry, Michael's just prompted a question on. I was trying to find it in your submission. I seem to recall that the current distribution of the Latin American retail outlets is not all inside the shopping centre as it is now. It's in a number of clusters around, and it's just moving the clusters about. You're not all, as I say, you're not all in the town centre as it currently is configured. Am I right in thinking that?
Well, the Elephant and Castle commercial area, which we account for, is that particular 4 clusters that we identify. One being the shopping centre, Elephant Road, the arches at the back of the strata, and Newington Butts. So that is within very close proximity, and nothing further beyond that would be acceptable if they are within the centre. So we're talking about the 13 shops that are Latin American, but also other BME traders, and the same with the 2 arches are going to be lost.
Thank you for reassuring me that I hadn't read something that it's totally wrong. Okay, are there any further questions from members? Sarah?
Thanks very much. The proposals have obviously been developed over a period of time, and I'm conscious that they have changed as they've gone on, and that there's been a process of engagement and consultation. And I just wondered if any of you had anything you wanted to say about those changes, and whether they take on board some of the concerns and issues that you've been raising throughout.
In terms of the traders, one of our main oppositions was the lack of compliance for the 10%. That has been achieved. The other big opposition we had was the lack of a relocation strategy. We presented a deputation on the 9th of May. A relocation strategy and mitigation strategies have been developed as a result of that. One that we still think is not sufficient because there are certain considerations that are not being taken, like, for example, fund for relocating back to these sites. We don't understand how the money has been, the amount of money that has been allocated, how that has been done, based on what, because there's discrepancy between what the traders claim and what the fund is allocated. So clarity on that would be really good. And I do think there's been no concession to the character of the area and the use of the area as a BME, as a centre of BME economy or migrant ethnic economies, which is. So there is no concession to that. So we're still very unsatisfied with the fact that there isn't any concessions to that, and the fact that this is a big sort of void in terms of what the equalities impact assessment says. It will have a negative and adverse impact upon these populations. So the town centre does not address the equalities impact assessment at all, and the negative impact.
Okay, I will ask you a question. What are you desperate to say? What would you like to say?
No, I would just like to add to my colleague Patrick what she said about the new proposal and what has been added. And what has been added for us as traders is that we come back when the site is completed to an affordable unit in 2025 or 2026 when it's completely finished and it's ready. They have given us the right in the application to come back based on 40% lower than the market rent. But how much is the market rent going to be in 2025, 2026? We don't know. So 40% of 100,000 is 60,000. So is that a way for us to basically, we don't know if this is going to be viable for us to come back unless we have a specific figure.
I understand that.
No problem. Thank you.
At the moment you're on a short-term tenancy and you have considerably less than market rent, don't you?
Sorry, can you repeat that again?
At the moment, it has been really difficult to predict what's happening, and in 2007, when some odd-wing sort of put forward a scheme and everyone knew that a development was going to have a number of traders are now on temporary arrangements, and they are significantly under market rent at the moment on the basis that at some stage a development is in the offing, and people understood that when they signed those leases. I understand. Is that not true?
Sir, I totally disagree with this comment. It's not true. When the Lancy took over, or Elephant and Castle Property Limited took over, the first thing they did is formalize leases, and my rent at the time was basically 70% lower than basic, 70%. My rent is increased by 70% basically. And when I negotiated with the person who was talking about the rent, they said we're comparing us like for like with London Bridge, which is basically close to us. However, we don't get like for like because we don't have the security of tenure. So I used to pay basically 16,000, 8,000 plus service charge. Now I pay 20 plus service charge.
A year. We'll ask the Lancey what proportion of, and we know what proportion of that is of market rent at the moment. Do we? Anyway, we'll ask a question that someone we'll ask the Lancey Patria, and then I'm going to ask a couple of questions before we conclude this part of the session. Then we will have a comfort break for those who might be desperate.
I'd also want to add that another concern we have in terms of the relocation strategy is that the space that's been allocated is not enough. At the current, and these are numbers provided by the report and by the council, there is 4,000 square metres. Overall, by 2025, 2026, there will be a shortfall of 200 square metres in the entire site. But by 2019, there will be between 1,400 and 1,800. So if this is the time when the shops are starting to relocate and leave the shopping centre and the arches, there will be less than half of the available space occupied at the moment. So where are the other 2,000 square meters, sorry. There's a shortfall of 2,000 by 2019.
That is a legitimate question, and we can ask how that's going to be addressed. The three questions I'm going to ask. One is, does anyone wish to make a comment about the proposals to build a new ticket hall, improve the access to the tube station, and if those do not go ahead, has anyone got any comments about how they're going to manage the closure of the lifts and managing it so that people are not able to get access to the station? Basically, I'm basing that on the comments the guy from TfL made on SE1, reported SE1, that basically you're going to have to manage that in a different way. Anyone wish to make a comment on that? Briefly.
It will be very brief. Oh, sorry.
Jerry was first. You've got to be a bit quicker.
No, quicker on the bottom.
And he was absolutely spot on.
I understand that from the officer's report, paragraph 550, funding for the new Northern Line ticket hall has not been agreed between TfL and Delancey. And I think that's a big shortcoming of this application. If it is so important and such an integral part of the whole development, surely it should all be cut and dried and nailed down by now. Of course, we want to see a Northern Line tube station that continues to function properly and meet the needs of people at the Elephant Castle, but it doesn't look yet as if this development is providing it.
No, I understand that. Did you want to add anything to that, Patrick?
No, we would welcome the improvements, but I have to say that that is for the development, for the entire development of developers within the Elephant and Castle area. And it would be very helpful if TfL would have 2 lifts working most of the time, because we went through a long period with no lifts. And I think that, to take them seriously, for them to make grand statements like it's at the point of that they cannot cope, right? They should travel up to Bank Underground on 9 o'clock in the morning. The Northern Line is great.
We're now making... My comment was quite clearly about people had any comments about that. Jerry, did you want to add? Because you're grabbing the mic.
Yes, there was. I understand there is a representative of the Metropolitan Tabernacle here, Chris Cooper, who was asked if he could
take questions?
Take questions.
Because they have some issues that
They
we're
have
very
some
much-
issues. Yeah.
Well, no, I made it very clear at the very beginning, but if you'd like to come forward, very, very briefly. And from the Tabernacle, what comment would you like to make?
Thank you very much. My name's Chris Cooper. I'm from Metropolitan Tabernacle, which is the the large Baptist church adjacent to the LCC site. We are the longest residents of the Elephant and Castle. I moved there in 1861, and we have an extremely large congregation, about 1,000 people, and our work is in the community, particularly working amongst children and teenagers, bringing them in, and the planning issues result from our concern about our work. Now, firstly, we have Tower 3 on the West 2 site, 35-storey, the largest, the tallest of the three towers proposed, within a couple of metres of our boundary, at a point where the majority of our people, including hundreds of children and teenagers, enter and leave the building every week. Now, we've got number one, the Elephant, on the south side, redeveloped and so on, finished by Lend-Lease. That is at a little distance from our site, and yet even with that distance, and it being 100% owner-occupied, we've had missiles thrown from that block of flats into our premises. So we are very concerned about safety of this Tower 3 on plot West 2, but literally overhanging a major area of entry to and exit from our building. And also, of course, the proximity is giving you such an overwhelming development against a Grade 2 listed building. So it's out of proportion. That tower, the tallest tower, is the closest to our building. The second big issue that we have, so that's the safety issues, number one with that. Secondly, the setting of the building. The second big issue is loss of parking. We currently have a legal agreement with the LCC to park on their premises. That's been running for about more than 25 years. And we lose that completely. We also hire every Sunday many spaces in the shopping centre car park. We lose that also. Now, we are using 20 minibuses to bring in and out yesterday, on Sunday there were 717 children and teenagers in our Sunday schools and Bible classes. They're coming off the estates of South East London, and we're keeping them out of gangs and drugs and so on. And we need parking flexibility. So there's that issue. Third issue, the noise issue from this so-called cultural venue right alongside the front of our building. Very vague in the planning as to what that venue actually will do, who's going to occupy it. Is it a replacement for a nightclub? We don't know, but that gives us a noise concern, particularly transmission through the ground and so on. We've had a response from the planning department on that. We're checking out to understand whether that's an adequate response, but it's a concern for us. Fourthly, the wind issue. If anyone has tried to walk around number one, the Elephant, today, it's hard to stand on your 2 feet, and we're going to have 3 towers even closer to us, and that's a big issue for us. And fifthly, the construction period. That's been left to a rather vague statement in the planning proposals to be agreed later, basically.
As I said to Jennifer earlier, we'll make sure that people understand that quite considerably. With the third, any comment? And you touched upon it in terms of the London College of Communications or the London University of the Arts. Has anyone got any comment about if we were to refuse this application? Has anyone any comment to make with regard to the college finding another site elsewhere after 50 years on that site? I'm just asking. It is a leading question. It's not an open-ended question. Has anyone got any comments?
Can somebody in the audience? I think.
No, Mr.
Chairman. The reason I asked the question is does the land, since it's part and parcel of Southwark Council a long time ago, I do know the history of the area.
Sorry, sir.
Does the land belong to Southwark Council still, or does it still belong to the land scene? Who owns that land? Or are we giving away the silver again?
We're not giving away the silver.
I think the answer is very similar to the answer we gave about the Northern Line tube station. We would like to see LCC stay in the area. We would like to see them have a new campus, but we don't see why we should sacrifice so much so that they should do so in terms of affordable housing and the impact it's having on traders.
That's fine. I just raise it on the basis that it's quite common knowledge and has been said that should this application not go forward, Delancey will, their equity backers are likely to pull out and the development not go forward. And we have to weigh up because the chair wants to make sure that we look at this application in the round and that we explore all the benefits and all the harms. Some of the benefits are the retention of the university. Some of the benefits are the improvements to the rail, and these need to be weighed up against the harms. They have not been discussed, and I was asking the objectors whether they had any comments about that. Jerry?
I think it's up to Delancey to make a better job of the planning application if so much is at stake.
Anyone else? Yep.
The committee have to consider this application very carefully because the contractual or the applicant is actually Elephant and Castle Property Limited, not Delancey, whatever way it's put, and they are actually registered offshore and they are in debt of £40 million to the bank.
Thank you very much indeed. If there are no further comments... Oh, sorry, have you got a question?
Yeah, sorry. I just wanted to... I've forgotten your name already. Chris Cooper. I just wanted to put the same question to you as I asked at the very beginning regarding parking. You've obviously mentioned it in terms of the loss of parking, but could you just comment on what the consequence would be if this scheme were developed? What the consequence in terms of parking would be from yours and other operators in the area?
The issue is, for us is maintaining such a large community work amongst children and young people in the South London area, and it's going to put that under enormous strain. It could completely make that impossible if we really cannot park a reasonable number of vehicles near to our building.
My question was more as if obviously the scheme were given permission tonight and were developed and the parking capacity you currently have was lost, would the consequence of that be that your congregation and people using your facilities would park on residential streets nearby?
Well, we already are obviously parking in residential streets nearby. A large percentage of our congregation comes by public transport, and under pressure more will come by public transport. But it's the issue of our work amongst the children and teenagers we see as a critical community activity which has been going on now for many, many years and shows great social benefits. So it's something which, that is what we're trying to defend, not our convenience in driving into the Elephant and Castle.
Adele, and then we shall move on, I think.
Thank you, Chair. So just following on from that, where do your minibuses live when they're not transporting young people on a Sunday?
They live on our premises. We have a little bit of parking on our premises. We squeeze them all in. But obviously to deploy such an operation involving, there's 5 sites in South East London, including the Tabernacle, it involves a lot of logistics with vehicles. So we cannot just leave them all parked in closely. And there's also people having to bring in young families and so on for Sundays. So we are using adjacent streets. We have had cooperation from Southwark Parking on our end of Brook Drive. There are regulations which are not enforced on Sunday so that we can park, and we really appreciate that. But this whole scheme will obviously put us under enormous further pressure.
Thank you. Thank you all very much indeed. I now propose that we take a break till 10-minute comfort break. Well done everyone, thank you very much indeed. Comfort break and then we'll get the next group of people coming up. Thank you very much.
Right, Chris.
Yeah,
Oh, right, coming up
Right, so that's like third.
Where am I?
Chris, you're next to the parcel, and then they need to come up as well because we may. Is Chris going to deal with the construction loan for
Suspect there are. No, probably essentially recycled. No, I didn't take it away if you want. I'll take it away from you.
How did they get that? I saw them carrying it. So sorry, that's right.
What time is it now? 8:30. You're probably be about half hour, maybe 3/4 of an hour, because I'm going to have to ask the same questions of them as we've asked everyone else, because that's only fair. Yeah, and certainly the concerns that you have, the concern. And I think some people have, no, you did perfectly wrong, and I think some people need to be able to address the issues of construction traffic and then deliveries later, and how everyone's going to get their Amazon deliveries. Is that right? Including yodel. No, don't worry. That must be using push bikes and distribution. Most people haven't done it. Is this one here recorded live?
Amazon. You know the robot in the summer. We sat as a little sat outside, and as we were talking, the sun had such a this was one of the Amazon robots, and we were just like, how's it going to get over the traffic volume? It was just so it's
So it goes round and delivers some small items. And there was one, elephant castle. They get a message. They get an automated message and alert. So they come to the thing and they've got a code, so they punch in a code and they get their item. It's got a tamper device on it. Have you not seen that? You need to watch Click more. Click's brilliant. We actually sat and watched the thing and we were like, how did we get it? And it did, it went to it. So it's not interesting. We've seen stuff on the road as fast.
That's a very nice one.
At the same time, the challenges of the same as fast. They've got loads of hats because they have to negotiate the fact that the landscape trees stays to the end. Picture memory thing is a constant change. That's the same as
Okay, anyway, thank you everybody very much indeed. We'll now go through the same range of Anyway, what's going to happen, everybody, is we're all going to sit down again, and then the applicant is going to be asked exactly the same questions as everyone else has been asked, out what they're saying. Okay? Please allow them to speak. It makes it so much easier, and we might be able to get home, which would be great. We then go into a last session with the officers to we had the ward councillors first. We asked them loads of questions as well. Get the same. Then we'll take. And then we have the last part where the officers here will answer questions raised by the members based on the questions and the comments that have been raised. Is that clear? Brilliant. I'll be watching still here, it's okay. Relax everyone. Is everyone in? Everyone ready? Everyone put their twigs away and everything? Yeah, there we go. So, if you introduce yourselves from my left, right along the line, who's doing the, and you're...
So I'm Stafford Lancaster from
Delancey. Tell us who you are, and then we'll come back to Stafford, and your 3 minutes will start precisely. The lad on the right hand side finishes giving us his name and what he does. Alright? Brilliant. Go!
Jerome Webb, GIA, Daylight and Sunlight.
Neil Young, Get Living, Housing Management.
Pascal Levine, DS2.
Could you use the mic as it goes past?
Pascal Levine. All right, okay.
Dictation speed.
DS2, affordable housing and viability. Pascal Levine.
Neil.
Neil Young from Get Living.
Yeah, not the Neil. I was disappointed.
Viability, affordable housing.
Kim Humphreys, Colville Ventures Engagement.
I'm Richard Ward from DP9 Planning Consultants.
Natalie Brett, UAR London College of Communication. I'm the Pro Vice Chancellor.
Artur Carulla from Alex Morrison Architects.
Sorry, your name again?
Artur, that's A-R-T-U-R.
Oh, okay. Hello, Zumura.
Chris Gent, WSP Transport Consultants.
Chris Transport. And your 3 minutes start now?
Thank you, Chair. As I said, I'm Stafford Lancaster, Investment Director at Delancey and representing the applicant. I'm proud to present our proposals to you this evening for Elephant and Castle Town Centre, the next phase of Elephant's long history and the final piece of the regeneration jigsaw. These proposals are the result of 4 years of dedicated work, not only by a world-class development team, but also by your regeneration and planning officers, and most particularly by the local community. We have been consulting and working with the local community, all those people willing to engage, for all 4 of these years. We've held a range of formal exhibitions and working groups. We've attended over 130 stakeholder meetings. We have listened to the community. We have embraced many of the ideas shared. In the end, over 90% of the people who engaged support our proposals and say that they want to see this new town centre delivered. Our planning application is required to be determined in accordance with the development plan, which in this case comprises the adopted London plan, the adopted Southwark core strategy and the saved Southwark plan and emerging policy. We welcome the conclusion in the officer report that our proposals conform with the development plan. Our housing proposals offer 35% of the 979 new additional homes at a range of rental discounts averaging 50%, with priority for Southwark residents and workers, independently assessed as being the maximum reasonable amount of subsidised housing in accordance with planning policy. Despite this, senior officers and the leadership of this council have pushed us to improve this offer. We have responded and have introduced voluntary subsidy to provide 19 further homes at London Living Rents, 57% of the discounted homes are now at social and London living rents. Trader relocation is an inevitable consequence of our proposals. We are delivering a comprehensive package to ease and assist this process of huge change for these business tenants. Our retail proposals are fully policy compliant, including in respect of affordable retail. Our proposals incorporate significant community use. Leisure use for all members of the community will be integral to this.
30 seconds.
Bingo probably being one of them. The new town centre delivers significant benefit for a huge range of people. A new integrated Northern Line with escalators replacing queues for the lift. Guaranteed retention of the LCC. An educational and cultural icon retained, not lost. Reconnection of historic routes lost and creation of new ones. We have consulted and listened. We comply with the development plan. The new town centre delivers real benefits for all. I hope you can support your officer's recommendation this evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Right, members. We now have an opportunity to ask questions. I've made a note of most of the stuff that people have asked, and I'm sure that each and every one of you has done pretty much the same. I think it would be probably best to take it in the order that we took the objections in. So have any members got questions regarding St Oswin Street and the impact on that part of the Elephant and Castle behind the current LCC? Adele?
I haven't, Chair. If it's okay, I'll tie that into the parking.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
So, Oswin Street obviously is a very small street, which, as you heard, has already suffered quite a lot from the construction of the Elephant. Construction's going to happen. You know, residents are fed up with it, but it is going to happen. I'm concerned about how it's going to be managed, but I'm particularly concerned about the servicing and all of the accessible parking being provided in that bit of the development in the basement. So why is all of the parking for the site in? Well, there's two things actually. Why is all of the parking for the site in that bit, especially given that it is disabled parking only? Does that mean that all of the accessible flats are going to be in that part of the site? Because normally they get fitted out as you go along. So I'd just be interested to understand the rationale. And sorry, further on the parking as well, could you clarify? So there was, I think it was in the addendum or it was in a bullet point, that there were something about 13 spaces, and I couldn't work out whether there'd been an omission of 13 spaces, so I couldn't work out whether there were now going to be more spaces and 13 more spaces or 13 less spaces. Oh, here we go, page 56. Yeah, so it said originally there were going to be 34 spaces, and then it said something about an omission, so I couldn't understand whether 13 of them had been omitted or 13 of them had been removed. If you could clarify that, that'd be helpful. Thank you.
Okay. I'm going to direct the question to Chris, our transport and servicing expert. So we're going to come back to you now around construction management, traffic management. We'll talk to servicing. The particular question on disabled parking is only within the former shopping centre site, so the east site. Is that your point? In the basement there.
So it's the west side.
Yes. So the west side. Sorry. Yeah. So the west side. Okay.
But it is actually the west. Yes.
And the question, the clarification on the omission of 13 spaces. Chris, would you be able to deal with the response, please?
So I start with construction first of all. The construction.
It's going to follow the next one.
You're going to have to move up.
Do you want to start with me?
Yeah, no, you might. Probably better for people to just walk round. I know it's a bit of a pain, but the people behind you can't hear unless you move.
Okay. So if I start with the question on construction traffic, as I understood the question, it related specifically to the west side and Oswin Street. So I'm going to focus on construction traffic for the west side.
Yes.
So construction traffic on the west site will peak at 128 movements per day. That's 64 vehicles. Movements will exceed, on average, 100 movements, that's 50 vehicles per day, for a period of less than 6 months throughout the construction period. And the total construction period is about 4.5 years on the west site. A construction management plan will be prepared and will need to be approved by the council prior to construction taking place. Measures that are already agreed but that will be included within that construction management plan include construction hours will be limited to 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. Monday to Friday, 8 a.m. to 1 p.m. on Saturday, and with no works taking place on Sunday or on bank holidays. All vehicles and suppliers will be required to comply with best practice, such as the Fleet Operators Recognition Scheme. Following public consultation that we undertook and feedback on the use of Oswin Street as an access route for construction, we've looked at the construction access point to the site, and it is still from Oswin Street, but it will be from the very northern end of Oswin Street. So the majority of construction traffic will not be travelling, or there will be no construction traffic travelling to the southern end of Oswin Street, to Brook Drive or to Pastor Street.
And the same applies to exit, so vehicles will exit at the top of Oswin Street as well.
Vehicles will enter Oswin Street from St George's Road. They'll travel along Oswin Street for 30-40 metres, turn into the site, undertake their loading or unloading, turn around, come back out of the site towards St George's Road and exit. So that was construction. Should I pause and see if there's...
Yes. Ask Adele, she's the one that's raised the question.
Yeah, well, no, so just obviously, so we've got now, with all of the Elephant and Castle and the Cycle Super Highway, we have now got additional, so we've already got the CS, sorry, apologies.
Yeah,
CS, we've already got CS7, which cuts across, actually I don't think it cuts across at Oswin, I think it cuts across at the next one up. But we've also got the Circle Superhighway, and we've got bus stops there. So it's, you know, it is a tricky manoeuvre. Was there no other opportunity to service to come off from the Elephant and Castle? Was there no way around it? Have you gone for the cheapest and most efficient in that sense option rather than
value for money?
Yeah.
No. Following significant discussions with Transport for London, it's not acceptable to them to interfere with the operations of buses or of the cycle superhighway. So there's no possibility to access the site directly from either Elephant and Castle or from St George's Road.
But coming in there, you actually do interfere with the buses still and the cycle superhighway, because the cycle superhighway goes up there.
I think we're now getting to the stage. Chris, you want to give your answer? And I suspect I can it might be. Go on, Chris.
So the access will all be via public highway, where vehicles are entitled to make those movements up until the direct access point into the site on Oswin Street, which doesn't cross bus routes, bus cages, red routes or the cycle superhighway. But all of these measures will be dealt with within the construction management plan and will be looked at and will need to be approved prior to construction taking place.
Did you have a question about transport and deliveries later on? Chris, while he's in the mic spot.
Disabled parking.
There's disabled parking.
I've got a few on parking.
Have you?
Yeah. I mean, in terms of deliveries, I presume it will be exactly the same answer, that TfL won't allow crossing the buses and the superhighway. So I presume it's the same, that TfL won't allow it, so Southwark has to lump it, basically. The usual story.
TfL certainly won't allow any access point into the site from their highway network. The deliveries have been calculated as a reduction compared to London College of Communication, which has a large number of deliveries from many specialist suppliers, as well as significant student activity for things like film crews going out and undertaking filming activity. The residential deliveries are largely consolidated by a small number of national delivery companies. The move towards more frequent deliveries and being able to pick your delivery time is actually seeing an increase in smaller vehicles and many more bicycle and motorcycle deliveries, so that tends to reduce impacts further. Shall I move on to the blue badge question?
Yes.
So I'll touch on the 13 that were removed first of all. In the original submission of the application, there were 13 blue badge spaces on the east site in the basement, accessed from New Kent Road. Following consultation with Transport for London, they would not accept residential blue badge parking accessing the basement from New Kent Road, and we were required to remove the blue badge parking from the east site. That is why the blue badge parking is only on the west site. 34 spaces are provided there, and those spaces will only be for residents of the west site to ensure that travel distances don't exceed 50 metres for stick users, 150 metres for wheelchair users. It's worth noting that the London plan requirement is for up to 10% of units to be provided with blue badge parking, and the 34 spaces on the west site is below that. So it's already a significant reduction on the amount of blue badge parking that would be required by current London plan policies. It is in excess of the minimum requirement of the draft London plan policy that's just been issued for consultation. And it's worth noting that from blue badge statistics of users within the borough, approximately 3.4% of residents are blue badge holders. 90% of those are over the age of 50. So it's very much an older demographic that tends to hold those blue badges. And the provision that is there within the west site has been agreed with officers as being appropriate for the site.
Can I let Adele finish, and then Hamish Schuster, you, Robert?
So actually, probably not a question for you now. Maybe I don't know whether it's a question for you, Arto. Given that all of the accessible parking spaces are in that site, and people aren't going to be expected to park there and walk across to fix the object to the other one, how are you going to ensure that all the adapted properties are actually within that part of the site? Because as I said, quite often we don't, at planning stage, we don't have it tied down to where it's down to when they have the fit out that they usually allocate the relevant properties. So if you could help me on that.
I'm actually going to stick with taking it. Okay. The position from Transport for London is that with the new Northern Line ticket hall and the provision of accessible bus services for the local area, that actually it's perfectly reasonable for blue badge holders to be able to live in adapted apartments on the east site and use the very high quality accessible public transport provision that is available to them. Clearly anybody who is a blue badge holder and requires a car parking space would be limited to the offering on the west site. But in order to give people a range of options, Transport for London were very keen that people recognise the east site is also an accessible site, albeit it has no parking.
Yeah, no, so sorry to labour this point, but so if people on the east side are expected to use the very good and newly improved public transport, and there are not 34 people in 34 accessible flats on the west side, that will make those car parking spaces, or some of them, redundant. So what happens then? Because we get this all the time, people are putting in car parking spaces that don't then get used, and then they just get sold or whatever, and it actually starts arguments, and we as councillors have residents say, well, I'm looking at all these empty parking spaces and I can't have one. If it's not going to be tied to properties, I don't understand how you've done that calculation.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so to clarify, the wheelchair accessible units are spread across both sites in equal proportion, equal percentage, not equal number. On the west side, you've got the conventional old policy correlation between wheelchair accessible units and 10% of accessible car parking. On the east side, you maintain the proportion with the units, but the car parking has been omitted. So it's not that the provision on the east side has been amalgamated with the west side, and therefore the west side has over provision. Across the whole scheme, with the old standards, there would be, in that sense, under provision, and there would be an adequate provision on the east side as a standalone.
So my question is, are there going to be 34 wheelchair accessible properties on the west side?
I think there is also an answer that might come later about how we'll manage access to visual places and how that's managed through the process that our officers may be able to assist with.
Would you like me to deal with that point now? Since the plan application was submitted, car parking spaces on the east side were removed at the request of TfL. That's identified circa 6,000 square feet of space which could be used for something else. And already we've committed to looking at what that might be, potentially an additional leisure type use which could include bingo. So that's what we've committed to so far. It's already in the Section 106 heads of terms, and we're keen to explore it further with officers.
I've got the figure for you. It's 51 units on the west side.
51
yeah,
accessible units.
Which I should point out exceeds the requirement of 10%.
Thank you.
Brilliant. We can ask a further question to clarify how it will be monitored and managed. Adele, did your train of thought come to a conclusion? Hamish, would you like to start your train of thought?
Yeah, thank you. I was going to ask about wheelchair parking as well, but I think I'll leave it. I think we've exhausted that. But I do have a few other parking related questions. And servicing as well. Should we do parking and servicing at the same time? Yeah. Okay. So obviously this is a car-free development on the whole, aside from those accessible parking bays. Ordinarily, when we have a car-free development at an application stage, there's typically a provision for car club membership to be provided to the residents. That doesn't appear to be the case here, and I was wondering why not.
We looked at the possibility of provision for car club membership, and there was an offer on the table to look at car club membership, but through discussions with local car club operators, there is an over provision of space on the Elephant Park site, and there's no commercial demand for more car club spaces to be provided, and it was agreed with officers.
Sorry, I didn't follow what you just said.
So within the local area, there are already more car club spaces and car club availability than demand for future residents using them and existing residents using them. So it was agreed with officers that because there is an existing high level of provision that will meet the demand of this development, an obligation to provide even more car parking that a car club operator wouldn't want to put in wasn't worth including.
Okay, sorry, I think this answers my question. My question was about the provision of free membership for the residents moving into the scheme, as opposed to provision of bays itself.
Sorry, I didn't hear that.
The question is about whether there is free car parking.
It's normally part of the Section 106 that residents in car-free developments will receive 3 years free membership of a car club scheme. That's not here. Why not?
It might be worth officers clarifying this point. Can I ask?
I'll ask it of officers later.
Okay, but what I would say is that in the existing heads of terms, we have committed to 3 years membership to the mayor's
cycle scheme. I saw that. Yeah.
So that's
not the car scheme. Obviously, the purpose of a car-free development is to get cars off of the roads by encouraging people into car hire, car sharing schemes as a means to do that. So I was surprised to see that that wasn't part of the scheme, but I will ask officers for an explanation later. In terms of car use generally in the area, I think it's a pretty fair observation that any car-free scheme doesn't mean that people in those schemes won't either own or use cars. It simply means they can't obtain parking permits. We've already heard from the objectors that there is a CPZ in operation in the nearby area, which is only in operation certainly at the moment, but I think they said there might be a review, in operation during the weekdays, daytimes. Have you forecast the impact, the possible or likely impact on nearby residential roads of car use stemming from this development, either from the residents or from users of the leisure facilities, or indeed displaced users from the tabernacle or other facilities that currently do have some parking in the vicinity, which would be removed as a consequence of your scheme?
No, because of the existing controlled parking zone provisions that are in the local area, and the requirement of the local authority to enforce those restrictions, it wasn't deemed necessary to undertake an assessment of residents owning cars that they would not legally be entitled to park within close proximity of their homes.
Again, I think you've misunderstood what I said. They're not legally prohibited from owning a car or parking it in proximity, close proximity to their homes. They're prohibited from doing so between the hours typically of 8:30 till 6:30 during the day. So an increase of 1,000 extra properties in the area potentially brings with it an increase in cars that are parked on nearby residential streets, which are subject to a CPZ during the day, but cars are parked there from 6:35 in the evening until 8:25 in the morning. Have you not done any forecasts of the impact that that might have? Or the second part of that was not just the residents, but also the users of the shopping centre site at the weekends, people coming to do their shopping, maybe wanting to park their cars there, or people coming to use the leisure facilities which are being provided on the site, whatever those forms might be, or the users of the Tabernacle Church, etc.
I think the general thrust of your question is understood.
Well, it wasn't the first one.
No, it is now.
There hasn't been an assessment of increases in car parking. This is one of the most accessible areas within London. It has very good public transport provision and cycle connections. It's policy compliant with both Southwark Plan and Transport for London policies in terms of the provision of car parking and the provision for sustainable modes. It's not an assessment that would be undertaken on any other scheme that I've worked on or that I understand WSP have worked on. So no, it's not been undertaken. And it's not, in my experience, it's not something that's likely to create a significant problem. It's not been reported on other schemes we've worked on.
Well, in my experience as a councillor, it creates an incredible problem.
We're now talking about, this is the opportunity to, that's for later when you are expressing a view about the application rather than
I shall save my responses for later. Okay, fine. What about short-term parking needs? For example, people needing to have a engineer come fix their washing machine. Is there where is that provision for the site?
That provision is within the service yards on both sites. So service yard on the east site and the service yard on the west site, subject to the access time restrictions that are in force on the east site.
Which effectively are only overnight, is that correct? The access being overnight.
So the access restrictions are 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. So access would need to be made before 7 a.m.
And then the vehicle couldn't depart until 7 p.m. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I'd just like to Sorry.
No, I was just going to say, with this discussion in mind, I mean, one thing perhaps...
Hold on a second, I'd rather you didn't start arguing amongst yourselves. It's hard enough following that.
One thing that it might be prudent for us to do, based on the questions that we're getting, is to explore the potential whether we could commit to funding a study that might look at extending the terms of the CPZ, for example.
I mean, I would suggest that would be a reasonable commitment for you to make, and I would expect would be quite welcome. And perhaps that could look at dealing with some of the issues which I, in my experience, am pretty confident would arise as a consequence of the development and the considerations of parking. So I think that's probably a good commitment. In that case, can I ask about servicing? Obviously, I understand the operation that you've talked about already of the servicing bays. I do appreciate the restrictions that there are and why they exist. I think you alluded to already the kind of growth in kind of day-to-day residential deliveries, be it a Tesco or a Carly delivery or an Amazon delivery or whatever. Can you just explain how that's going to operate in conjunction with the servicing of the site? Because, I mean, again, that feels... the servicing provisions on site and the restrictions to that, and the timing restrictions to that, don't feel adequate to meet the current typical 21st century needs of residential properties.
I mean, unusually we're here as a developer and a long-term investor and operator, and Neil Young here, I think, may be able to give you more of an operational context to that very good question.
Yeah, I think where we have to think, although we're talking about almost 1,000 homes here, and the envisaging when you're thinking about the rental is lots of individual owners not being very coordinated. The way Get Living works is it manages all those homes, and when you're talking about things like general maintenance, we have our own maintenance team on site. So a lot of that will be dealt with. So we're not having to have external contractors coming in every 5 minutes. We've got people based there who, when you're talking about white goods, for example, we can have those on site during the day. We can get those deliveries out of hours. In very much the way you get it in retail, where a lot of deliveries are overnight, that's very much something that we would work to. So and when we talk about deliveries, we have good relationships with those people to deliver. So where we work elsewhere, we know the delivery guys, we know how they work. You haven't got a situation where you've got people who aren't there, who aren't present, not sure how it's going to work, not sure where to do things. One thing we do is we work with those parties, and actually, I think it was said earlier, what you find out is actually there's only a handful of people who actually come to site to do those deliveries. So that's something we do, and I say on the maintenance side, part of the offer to all of the residents and all of the homes is that we coordinate that for them, and we very much work through that.
I think that's helped me understand a bit about how the maintenance type example I gave would work. But just to refocus on deliveries, are you saying that residents in this scheme would be prohibited from booking a Tesco delivery slot at 2 p.m. in the afternoon, or are they allowed to book that slot? And if so, where does that delivery vehicle park while it's making that delivery?
With the restrictions that have been agreed with TfL, the leases that are handed out to tenants would prevent them from booking delivery slots at that time. They would not have access to the basement service yard on the east site. On the west site, they would be able to have deliveries at those times of day.
Okay. One final question on transport. In the Transport for London response to comments on the application, they make a point, I can't see it immediately now, but they make a point, oh here we go, that no dedicated taxi rank is proposed, both in terms of sort of black cab taxis and taxi ranks, but also, again, the increase in sort of minicabs, Uber, etc. I mean, how is that proposed to work on the site, again, with such a... I appreciate there's good public transport links on the site, but inevitably people will still use private hire vehicles. How and where do they use the site?
There's an existing taxi rank on the north side of New Kent Road, and there is the opportunity for drop off and I guess pick up by taxis on Elephant Road. For the remainder of the streets surrounding the site, particularly the east site, which is where you would expect to see the most taxi activity, it's all red route and bus stops where taxis are not permitted to stop. So the only available space within reasonable distance of the shopping centre and the town centre site is Elephant Road and that taxi provision, existing taxi provision on New Kent Road.
Brilliant. Adele, I'm going to take you in a moment because Lucas. Yes, exactly.
Thank you, Chair. I have a very different transport question. Now, we've heard about the new station box and ticket hall for the Northern Line. However, obviously, it's the Bakerloo line which is going to be extended down to Deptford and will presumably bring a lot of people wishing to come to the new shopping centre from there. However, the Bakerloo line station is on the other side of the road, and if you wish from memory to walk from the Bakerloo line to the Northern Line exit, you have to walk all the way along the platform. So what provision will there be to get all of those Bakerloo line travellers in and out of that site safely?
In some respects, I mean, Bakerloo line is transport to London.
Yeah, it's actually just a bit different.
Our plan and application identifies the volume of the TfL box, as we call it. The responsibility for the fit out of that box is with TfL, and whilst there is a design, I think it's fair to say that that's not fixed yet. So for the purposes of our plan and application, all we've said is, look, we can give you the volume of space which you think you need, but then they will pursue the fit out of that separately.
No, absolutely. I think genuinely it is a question that a number of people have raised, and I think it's one we need to explore with officers about where it is in the TfL planning process and what sort of provision can be made in the future. And I'm sure people will be able to give a brilliant answer, won't they? Yes. Adele, you're not going to do daylight and sunlight, are you?
No.
You've not taken my question.
No, I've got traffic. I've got one last traffic one. I just wanted to
daylight,
clarify.
sunlight. They've got the light there right at the end. They normally get away with it. You see at the end.
I will get to that in a minute.
Brilliant.
But just on the traffic, I just wanted to clarify when you said about the overnight deliveries for the white goods. That's only on the east side, isn't it? Tell me you're not going to be having overnight lorries delivering in Oswald Street, please.
Well, there aren't the same restrictions on the west side, so there's more flexibility in terms of when deliveries can take place.
During the day?
Yeah.
Brilliant. So, which member of the committee would like to ask the daylight sunlight question on behalf of the residents of Oswald Street?
Thank you.
No problem, Jennifer. Who's going to ask the question? Would anyone like... There were a number of... Exactly, there were a number of concerns raised about the daylight sunlight and the impact on Oswald Street, which I'm sure you've took a note of, and you'll be able to tell us what you the response to it. Go.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, there is undoubtedly going to be a change in the daylight and sunlight levels for residential properties on Oswald Street. The big question one has to consider is that change going to result in unacceptable levels of retained daylight, which means that those properties genuinely do suffer a daylight amenity absence. We have worked very closely with the architects throughout the process to assess the daylight and sunlight all around the site, and the overall levels of compliance on this site are extremely high for a development which is so big and so integrated with an existing urban environment. And I think that's testament to the overall level of work that's gone in to address and consider very carefully over the 4 years the daylight and sunlight aspects. Oswald Street is slightly unique. On the image you see on the screen behind you is extrapolation to this section which shows if you took the existing buildings on Oswin Street and literally just mirrored them onto the other side of the road to give an alternative base position than exists at the moment from the irregular built form of the college buildings, which sometimes step quite close to the pavement, sometimes step quite a long way away, sometimes quite low, sometimes quite tall. You can get a more accurate sort of consideration as to what might be a normal urban streetscape to base the scheme's comparison against. As a result of doing this exercise, one of the results of discussions with the planning officers and as us as a team was to pull the scheme quite considerably further back, which meant that taking the most sensitive windows on the Oswin Street site, and that line you can see drawn diagonally across, means that the scheme sits behind, effectively, what would have been the parapet level of a mirror image terrace of replica buildings down the street. So in summary, what we're looking at is to say, well, on this street, if you were looking at the retained levels of light in the future, once the development is in place, you have levels of light which are directly comparable with what would have been on a typical Victorian street of this nature, 12 metres apart, 4 stories in height. That's not to say the residents are not going to notice a change, but what they're left with is not uncommon for an urban environment. So, on that basis, you then add back in all the other aspects of the planning application and the other amenity benefits to get to what the planning officers have derived with the balance of the situation.
Would anyone like to ask a question? Can I see anyone other than Adele at this moment to just give them the opportunity? Adele, you've got the whole position.
Well, thank you, Chair. So if you could just clarify what the amenity benefits are to those 97 properties in Oswin Street that we heard are affected.
So Oswin Street is effectively where a conservation area meets an opportunity area, and this is something that occurs all across London, and very often that encounter is far more abrupt than what we are proposing. In addition to the numerical assessment of daylight onto those properties, I think one should consider the improvements as a whole that our scheme presents in relation to the current condition. The current condition has a building that is mostly blank. It is not a particularly attractive aspect. The pavement is incredibly narrow. There are numerous occasions of crime, very serious crime, which Natalie can tell you all the details about. What we are proposing is a very considerable expansion of the pavements, increasing significantly the distance between the buildings. We are adding more trees, and we are introducing exclusively residential use. So this is a street where there are no shops or other uses. There's just going to be residents and the front doors of those residents living on those mansion blocks. I can say hand in heart, if I was a resident on one of the terraces in Oswin Street, I would much rather have our proposed scheme across the street than the current conditions.
Okay, but it is different. You've got to accept people are resistant to change, and they need a lot of convincing, even with your hand on your heart. Adele, have you a supplementary question?
I have got a supplemental. But you're not denying that there is going to be an impact on 97 of those properties, which, by the way, are largely social housing properties. So that's people who are already on a significantly reduced income, a lot of them pensioners, actually, because they've lived there for a long time, who may have to have their electricity on a lot longer because it's now going to be darker. Has anybody thought about that particular impact?
No one is denying that there will be an impact on the daylight levels, and those levels, according to BRE methodology, will be noticeable. In terms of whether additional electric lighting is required, is really stretching the daylight analysis a step beyond its abilities, because all it is literally measuring is a single point on the outside face of the window as to whether you can or cannot see sky. The need for the actual level of light within a building is hugely affected by the reflected quality of the light, as well as whether it's a sunny day, a cloudy day, etc. So there are many factors involved in that. the only way to sort of draw a real human life comparison as to what this street will be like in the proposed scenario is to say, well, actually, if you were walking down that street and you had the two terraces of buildings on either side, would that feel like an oppressive and dark urban street? The answer, I think, would be no, because there are many, many streets like that across London. What this is going to be creating is one, from a purely daylight point of view, of a similar daylight quality as that kind of urban environment. Does that help?
You have acknowledged it's going to be worse than it currently is.
Yes.
Okay. Is that okay?
Thank you.
If there are no further questions around St Cosmos Street, we seem to have got another through. We now move on to do it in the order viability. Who's the viability? Right, who wants to ask a question of Pascal about viability? Adele.
I just wanted to go sort of right back to the beginning with my question, if I may, and ask what is the thinking behind delivering a PRS scheme rather than a for sale scheme? Because obviously, viability is different, because risk is different, etc., etc. So why are you doing PRS?
It's a strategy we've been working on with our investor group for the past 7 or 8 years around professionally managed rental accommodation. So the genesis of the reason is our activities in the Olympic Park, where we acquired from the UK government the former Athletes Village and created East Village, which alongside the creation of East Village as a new neighbourhood, was a new neighbourhood for a large-scale rental homes offered on a rental basis, a large-scale professionally managed basis. And off the back of that, we oversaw the setup of a managed operation, Get Living London, which set out to challenge the market around 3-year leases, CPI uplifts over the term of the lease, no fees, and more recently, no tenant deposits. We saw a market ripe for challenge in that space. We feel that Elephant and Castle, in terms of our judgment in terms of market demand at least, has a very significant potential for high quality housing in that tenure. I think the other thing we found at East Village was, in fact, the sorts of people living with us, our residents, came from a very broad range of backgrounds, earnings and everything else. When we first approached officers on affordable housing, we immediately proposed a situation where we were seeking to deliver 35% of the housing units at a discounted tenure, simply because that was our market. You can call it what you like, it's actually the marketplace we operate in. When we're delivering 1,000 homes in one go, we delivered 1,500 homes in one go at East Village. So we took a sort of very different view, I would suggest, than a conventional for sale builder, developer looking at affordable housing for an RP. We were looking at a more holistic approach to reflect what we felt was the marketplace that we were looking to operate in. Obviously at East Village, with a business that at the time was establishing and is now very well established with 97% occupancy. And Neil can talk more about that if you wish. And bringing that strategy to Elephant, and we hope into other areas of London as well on this sort of scale.
Then you've got a train of thought on this one, and we'll go there, and then I'll take Lorraine and then Sarah. If you could keep the questions as brief as possible, to just develop where I think you're going.
Well, I just wanted to ask. So obviously every site is different. Every site is unique. Not just in Southwark, but across London. Your East Village site, were you able to meet the affordable housing demands of that authority? I can't remember if you or Tower Hamlets.
It's the London Legacy Development Corporation. As you say, everything's different. In that particular project, which was delivered by UK government. I must stress, not by us. I'd love to take the credit. Although we were awarded a very important legacy, of course. But the affordable housing there was designated as to anything that wasn't market was sold before we were involved to a group called Triathlon Homes. Triathlon Homes being a for-profit SPV established by 2 registered providers and 1 commercial company, First Base, Southern Homes at the time, East Thames now, L&Q, thank you. So that arrangement, because of the way it was set up, is different. We work alongside very closely with Triathlon. We own together the management company that operates and manages the realm and common areas of the village.
So, but just to clarify, it was that was not like for like with the Elephant and Castle shopping centre. It was a very different scenario. So it's kind of not really fair to make a comparison between the two.
If I could ask Neil, who to.
There are you have to move the other mic a little bit as well, but not too far. Otherwise, it pulls the bikers out, or when someone turn off their mobile. So you're just looking at it. Brilliant.
I think we have to, and I kind of mentioned it earlier, but it is a very different proposition that we offer. And as Stafford was saying, we work very closely with Triathlon. We have regular meetings with them. We agree a strategy for the overall East Village. We do a lot of community events where everyone is invited, not just the Get Living residents, but everyone. And that goes from markets, that goes from Football Foundation, which we set up, which run every day of the week, which we get over 300 kids coming along, and that is again from Triathlon and from Get Living. And that
sorry to interrupt you, because I know time is short, but I'm talking. They're very worthy, all your community sports events and all of that. I'm talking specifically about providing the socially rented requirements. I'm interested in this scheme, obviously, but only because you mentioned another scheme. My original question was, did you meet the requirements of that? I know now that you haven't met the requirements on that because it was a different scenario. So,
do you mean affordable or social?
No, I mean social rented.
Well, so the answer is we don't manage the social rented properties at East Village. Our proposal here is quite obviously that we do manage the homes that are relevant to that sort of price point, if you like, if you want to call it that. We are in the process of working to establish a registered provider for profit, which we are entitled to do. We have to go through the process with the HCA, Homes England, around securing that accreditation, but we don't currently have it. We are also been in dialogue with the GLA for 2 years about what we do, 3 years, about what we do at Get Living, and the way that the GLA has looked to frame its policy in the SPG around how accredited managers can manage discounted homes, let's just call it that, if I can just for a minute talk about the broader perspective of those, an average discount of 50% of the market, then we do qualify around offering 3-year leases with no fees, with ALA recognition, RICS membership. So there is an evolution here. This is new, so it does bring challenges to explain what it is we're doing and to try and build your confidence and people's confidence in what it is we're doing. But it is something we haven't done, but it is our intention to do so at Elephant, to manage all the tenures on a 10-year blind basis, I would add.
Can I ask a supplementary on that, because I think you strike a very important part about it being new, and that members and others are looking with great interest about how it moves forward, and what we need as a consequence in terms of our decision taking is the reassurance that you are going to be sufficiently open to work with the local authority to make sure that there is open book accounting, that all the review mechanisms that are in place in terms of future viability, in terms of how that tenure split may or may not change as a consequence of shifts in value, are fully open and accountable, and we are able to negotiate a shift in that. Plus also, and I think this is for Neil, the way in which the affordable element, rather than the social rent element, is
managed in such a way that we have confidence and officers have confidence that the 3-yearly cycle and the shifts between the income bands is open, transparent, and should things start to go awry, we have the appropriate mechanisms in place to avert any disaster which would have a detrimental impact on individuals. Are you happy with those sorts of comments? And we are looking about best endeavours here. And I've had a long conversation about what best endeavours means. And I want to hear you say it. Thank you.
We have experience working with councils. We work closely with, as staff was saying, LLDC, but also with Newham on certain aspects of the housing at East Village. So that's something we have experience of. We also have a sophisticated management information system which enables us to keep track of everyone who rents with us, put together any reports we need, to give us any reminders in terms of the points where we have to review them with the council. And we're very keen that we engage with the council and work through what needs to be done here.
The one bit in that sentence that was missing was implied but not explicit with, and you are happy to be able to share all the things that you just described with our officers on an open book basis.
Absolutely, yes.
Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed. Does anyone want to reinforce that any further? Other than everyone nod in the right direction and say we think it's a good idea.
Well, I've got a question.
No, Lorraine, you're next.
Good.
Sorry, I jumped in your place.
You
Lorraine.
did.
I do apologise.
I should think
I
so
was
as
on a
well.
roll.
Yeah. Right. My question is, why have you been able to change the housing offer for higher income tenants but have been completely immovable on social rents?
I think as Stafford mentioned, the intention here has always been to deliver a build-to-rent scheme. And whilst a couple of people have mentioned that the existing policy is around a traditional affordable housing offer that incorporates social rented element, 50-50 I believe in this location, certainly the mayoral policy and the emerging local policy supports 100% discounted market rent to an intermediate product. But I suppose the important thing we've been trying to do over the last 12-15 months is ensure that the range of discounts offered reflect the widest possible range of household income. So that's all the way down to a social rent equivalent. So they will be rents that are target rents, the old social rents with a service charge. A large number is a London living rent equivalent. And then also rental levels which are referred to as discounted market rent in accordance with your emerging policy, the council's emerging policy. And whilst I suppose on the discounted market rented units, you've got a range of 60 to 90,000. That is household income. So it is anticipated, for example, there will be 2-3 beds with key workers sharing. So it has always been the intention, it's always been a discussion we've had with the local authority that it was 100% intermediate rent, but that it would always be a 35%. We've tried very hard to maintain that 35% offer.
Could I expand on the answer? Sorry.
I have a further question on that. So, an ordinary family that would want to rent one of these places would have to earn in the like of about £60,000 a year.
No. I think the table that's provided in the committee report and also in the addendum, I believe, the social rent equivalent. So the lower end of the band, the social rent equivalent is that will be available to people on the social housing waiting list, even though it's an intermediate product.
So you tell me how much they would have to earn to afford
There's no
one of the...
So under bands A, B, and C, which is the London living rent equivalent and the social rent equivalent, there's no earning requirement there. A is no earning requirement, it's just you have to be on the social housing waiting list, and we're working with the council on the nominations procedures for that. And then B and C are average ward household incomes. So I think they're roughly, need to double check, but they sort of range between about 35 up to about 55,000 household incomes. So you wouldn't need to earn 60,000 plus to get access to affordable housing on this scheme.
I think there is a point, and we do miss it sometimes. This is about This is about family housing and household incomes. So you are talking about people who are, I mean, for example, I had hoped someone would mention salary ranges. So if you had a police constable on 40,000 who would want to be here, and a teacher on 39,000, which is a main pay rank, 30,000 for a teacher. Sorry? Yeah, main pay scale is between 28 and 39,000. But even if you put them on 28,000, which is the wage in London, someone who is a first point of teacher salary and a firefighter would be have a household income of around about 30,000. That's just by way of putting it into context, and before we start having wild discussions about where these are pegged. Sorry.
Just to talk more about that. Yeah, our average income in our portfolio is 34,000. Our number one employer is the NHS. The police are in the top 5. So if you look at, and the point's well made about it's household income rather than salary. So where you've got a 60,000, 70,000, London average income is about 35,000. So if you've got 2 people working, it is a very affordable level.
Right, sorry, I've broken my own rules by making a contribution, but I didn't want that discussion to go totally off beam and make people make assumptions about income. Could you please, if we are talking about that, could you please use examples rather than talking about it in the abstract, because it makes it so much easier to understand. Are there any further questions about liability? And Michael, you come after Sarah. Okay. Sarah was on the list first.
I wanted to come back to a point that was made earlier in the meeting around the demand for a build to rent or a PRS scheme. It was a specific point raised by one of the objectors, and it was to understand from you what you've done to investigate, acknowledge what the need is for a build to rent scheme in the area.
I think if we talk big picture, the British Property Federation has recently said there's about 96,000 build to rent homes either in operation or going through construction. So I think that's showing the growth in the demand. I think the other point to make is if we look at the rental offering in London, the demand for rental is increasing. And I think another point to also make is that where we've got a shift in society in terms of the demand and the way people live their lives, we've had mention of things like Uber and such like. People actually are, if you look at kind of millennial-minded people, there is a much more demand towards a rental society. So we've certainly seen the demand for it. We've certainly done surveys on it which show that there is a demand for it, and we've seen that shift. We also have done focus groups in the Elephant and Castle area about developments in Elephant and Castle, which has showed there is demand for rental. And I think when you look at the stock within Southwark, there's a high proportion of rental in the borough.
So, Michael, Hamish and then
okay, I'm just trying to understand how these rentals work. So how do you know people's income, and what happens when their income goes up? Do they get thrown out after a certain period?
Yeah, so we've been working with the local authority on nominations procedures. It's not intended, whilst there's not going to be a traditional RP in place, whether Delancey eventually get their RP status, I don't know, but... Get living, sorry, okay. But the social rent equivalent, which is Band A, there will be they're 3-year tenancies with a tenant-only option to renew, sorry. They will, after 3 years, they won't be subject to re-eligibility, re-test of their income. Higher up the scale, so the DMR, which is the 60,000 plus to 90,000 household incomes, we believe it's right that there will be a test, but that can work both ways. So if income levels were to drop, they could qualify. There's going to be quite a lot of flexibility here, which is a new thing. They will be able to qualify for a lower rent, or alternatively, conversely, if they get a higher income, they could, in theory, go up the rental bands. I suppose the point is, on a traditional affordable housing offer, it is very fixed and there's no moving around. Whereas here, this is completely tenure blind, and the intention is for people to be able to move around within the affordability brands, potentially move out of private, but also other people move into the affordable. But there will always be that baseline provision, and I think it mentions it in the committee report that we're working with the local authority on a series of checks and balances to make sure we always have the right weightings in each of those bands.
This is, I would suggest, another innovation around having one owner and manager operating accredited, a proper professional manager operating all the units. Our ambition would be for somebody to stay in the home as long as they want. As an investor, that is very good news for us, to keep people in the homes as long as they want to be there, and to enable them to flex in terms of the housing subsidy they can qualify or indeed not qualify for if things change in their lives. I stress outside the most subsidised tenures we're proposing here. There is a weird thing with SIL, which we're very keen to work with central government to change, which is actually technically it's allocated to a unit. If somebody no longer qualifies for the subsidy, they've had a big earnings rise in 3 years, we have to move them to another home within the Elephant Town Centre. I'd really love it if they could just stay at home, and we're going to work on that. That's another example of how we want to challenge certain things that we think don't work.
For the sake of time, if Michael's happy with the answers as given, get to the bottom of it. Interest is one thing, whether it affects our decision making is another matter. I've got Michael, Hamish and then Adele, and hopefully people will begin to formulate their last questions about viability at this stage, because we've now got bingo traders and tabernacle. Sadly I didn't have the full line of the information.
Thanks, Chair. Can I... one of the objectors pointed us to paragraphs 366 and 367 in the report. This is the section which relates to the internal rate of return and the calculations which, as I understand it, the calculations which have been used for your viability assessment versus the council's viability assessment, and the council's position being that with an internal rate of return of 6.5%, which they seem to think would be reasonable, it would have been possible for you to have delivered a fully policy compliant tenure mix within this development. Could you please explain why you're not?
So the paragraph actually says that they felt through rental growth and cost management that a fully policy compliant scheme, and when you say policy compliant, we mean in accordance with the emerging policy P4 of your New Southwark plan, of the council's New Southwark plan. What we need to do on these assessments in accordance with policy is it's a present day assessment. So we need to target a rate of return which is deemed to be reasonable in accordance with policy. We believe that rate of return was between 10 and 12% internal rate of return. We agreed that 11% on a present day basis is a reasonable figure. We have an agreed position now that is the internal rate of return at today's date is 7.15%. That is roughly 4% below the target rate of return. So the other thing to think about here is before we had viability review mechanisms in place, which we will come on to, I'm sure, it was quite common on big, large, strategic, quite complicated sites to use growth and to say, well, what's going to happen to the market, what's going to happen to the build costs, and try and look at ways of expanding and increasing the affordable housing offer. We feel here, quite rightly in accordance with the policy and the guidance, that to look at it on the present day basis is the right thing to do, to recognise there is a below market return at 7.15%. Importantly, we haven't sought to reduce the affordable housing, which a lot of people would have done. But any future uplift, if GVA are right in their expectations about rental growth and cost inflation, and we get above that 11% return when we do the viability review, the affordability bands will be improved, so you will get more social rent equivalent, more London living rent and so on.
Could I just expand, because you asked about 6.5 and 7.15. It seems to me as I read it, but you must ask your officers and your experts, that they're saying mathematically if we delivered 36% on a policy compliant basis, the IRR would be 6.5%. It's a statement around maths. What it is saying is that our proposals deliver an IRR of 7.15%, which is accepted, I believe, by the independent team and by officers as a measure of the maximum amount of affordable housing subsidy this project can sustain. As Pascal has explained, there is actually a further view taken around potential growth, etc., that would actually deliver a 10 to 12% IRR, which is in fact where an investor taking on this level of risk in the end needs to see a return. We're prepared to take that view.
Thank you very much indeed. Can I suggest, in formulating your question, that in part, Jacob and Mike, who are here from GBA, might be able to give some commentary later on what Pascal has.
I'm here. Microphone,
oh, sorry. Basically, we have our advisors in terms of the viability, and they might be able to offer some commentary on what Pascal has said and the assumptions that they have made and how that balances out and what the nature of the risk and the opportunity might be.
Yeah.
All right, I think that's...
Yeah, that's fine.
Hamish.
I will leave that kind of follow up on the viability for later. Just to pick up on the point, I'm so sorry, I've forgotten your name. Pascal. The point that you just said in regards to the sort of review mechanism and the potential I suppose uplift in affordable provision in this scheme if I suppose if the economics work out for you guys. Is there built into that a preference for any additional affordable provision to be social rent, and therefore bring the so not even a preference, a priority to bring then the scheme into that policy compliant tenure mix as a first port of call before any further tweaks are made elsewhere? Does that make sense?
It does make sense. I think in normal circumstances, yes, potentially you would be looking to increase the overall headline percentage. I don't think that's the case here. I think any additional subsidy over and above the target return will be used to increase the lower bands. You have an emerging policy P4, and in a perfect world you would get to a point where P4 is replicated exactly.
And the final question, and would that be at a loss to would that be at a loss to the higher bands, or would that be a kind of shifting down of the bands so that you end up just with a kind of concertina effect of affordable housing? Would you end up with additional social rent units to the sacrifice of effectively private rent?
Yes.
Yes. Good.
Yes.
Okay, brilliant. I love the yes answer. Adele. And then this will be probably the last bit of viability, because I want to give justice to the bingo traders and that.
Thank you, Chair. So this is a really, really complicated site already. You've got all of the traders who belong to sort of specific groups as well, identified groups that you need to make provision for. You are re-providing for the LCC, you're giving them a new home, you're rebuilding the underground, and at the same time you're doing this experimental thing with rented properties on some 3-year turnaround, reassessing everybody every 3 years. That is a huge risk. Why on earth have you thrown all of those risks? I mean, I have to say I'm not feeling very comfortable at the moment, because I feel like there are too many risks whirling around in all of this, and I don't understand why you're doing the private rented bit in particular rather than homes for sale. Would it not have been more? Would you not have been able to deliver a more policy compliant scheme if you had done the traditional for sale and all of the other kind of complicated stuff?
It may be a question for staffing from the commercial perspective. I suppose most of the items in terms of the underground, the LCC and so on would be delivered by a market builder as well. So a lot of the costs are the same. and from a valuation perspective, I'm arguing this market, if you had 650, 700 private market for sale units, that's a tough place to be as well. But I think in terms of the drivers from a build to rent perspective, Delancey might be better off answering that question.
I mean, arguably there may be a slightly different mix around affordable. That's why there is an arrangement. If we ever took the properties out of that tenure for quite a long period, then
I think there was a general question
around
why are you taking the overall risk of a rather complicated series of...
We could have had this conversation 6 years ago, 2011, when we stood up and wrote a very large cheque to buy the Athletes' Village. You know, in the end, that's what our shareholders entrust us to do, which is to manage risk, but to take a different position in the marketplace. We have a housing crisis. We have huge housing need. We filled 1,500 homes with our residents within 3 years. Unprecedented. Nobody's ever done it. If we were a for sale developer, I would probably suggest, despite the excellent, I have to say, work of Lendlease in terms of their delivery may be very different as well in terms of the pace of delivery. It is a different model. It's not an experiment from scratch. We have significant growing, and we're learning, growing knowledge at East Village. But in the end, you know, it's a judgment that we are making and prepared to make. I would say as well, the LCC, the transport, are all critical ingredients of that risk, because in the end we think that will create a town centre that is more vibrant than shops and houses. You know, and with a new transport system that's fit for purpose. So all of these things do come together, and you know, on a risk basis, you're right. It is a very ambitious project, but we have been ambitious before, and we continue to be so.
Adele, and then Hamish, and then we move on off this one, because we're now moving away from viability into risk, which risk is not necessarily a planning issue. All we need to do is have the confidence that they have the ability to understand the risks that they are taking, and confidence in the measures in place. And we've got the oversight.
Can't hear you.
Sorry. And that we have the oversight to be able to say that we as a local authority can see that risk and have a view about it. Adele, and then Hamish, and then we move on to Peter.
Well, actually, risk and viability are intrinsically linked, and particularly in this scheme, because they're taking a risk, and the community is also taking a risk, or a risk on this, or a hit on this, as it were, because their experimental scheme is not delivering policy compliance, particularly on the housing, which the local community are very exercised about. And so that is a viability. Actually, I've forgotten what my question was. Apologies, Chair.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, I do understand that it's about the location of risk. Hamish, and then we're doing bingo.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm not quite sure how to frame this question, because I'm not quite sure what I'm asking. But I don't know if you've got the report in front of you, but so paragraphs 373 and 374 relate to, well, they're under the subheading covenant. Bradine mentioned in her initial remarks about the scheme that because the developer was in effect the owner going forward, that I wrote it down, that the affordable provision would be secured in perpetuity. Obviously, the covenant, the way I read this section of the report, suggests that you've effectively negotiated out of what would be the emerging policy in regard to covenant ownership. But putting that to one side, you've effectively got a covenant to own my reading of this is that you're not permitted to sell on the site for 20 years. Does that impact upon the long-term sustainability of the affordable provision within the site, and how can that be guaranteed if you can't guarantee that you're going to be the owner in 21 years' time?
You're quite right. The affordable housing is delivered in perpetuity. That's a given. The build-to-rent policy at regional and local level requires a covenant. So if someone comes in with a build-to-rent scheme, clearly they're both C3 uses, residential open market and So local authorities quite rightly want the protection that if they give a planning consent for a build to rent scheme as 100% intermediate accommodation, for example, the build to rent developer in 5 years' time isn't going to sell all the units and disappear. Now, clearly, the applicant here has a long-term commitment to the site and to the area. What the covenant does is says, if you break the covenant, which is in the legal agreement, in the Section 106 agreement, within a 20-year period, there will be a penalty, and that penalty is decided. It will be in the Section 1. It will be very clear. So there will be a financial liability. It doesn't stop the developer doing anything in terms of some of the points you picked up on, but in terms of selling build-to-rent units to market sale units, they can do it, but there would be a financial liability back to the local authority. Hopefully that makes sense.
That does make sense, but it makes sense if what you're saying is that that's the case for 20 years. So in 21 years' time, you could sell off the housing stock in all 79 units in this site.
Not the affordable.
Not the affordable, but I thought the whole point of the build-to-rent scheme was that